you to record. Okay, good.
Hey. All persons have any business before the Honorable Beverly Cannoni, Justice of the Norfolk Superior Court, and for the County of Norfolk. Draw near, give your attendance, you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This court is now open. You may be seated.
All right. Good morning again, counsel and Ms. Reed. Good morning, jurors. So we appreciate that you were patient and we got a lot of work done this morning before you came out. It's cool in here now, as long as you're away from the sun from the windows. It should be fine. The county has done a really terrific job of making sure that they got this building nice and cool for us today. So I appreciate what the county's done as well. I do have to ask you those 3 questions. Were you all able to follow my instructions and refrain from discussing this case with anyone since we left on Tuesday?
Yes.
Everyone said yes, nodded affirmatively. Were you also able to follow my instructions and refrain from doing any independent research or investigation into this case?
Yes.
Everyone said yes or nodded affirmatively. Did anyone happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case since we left here on Tuesday? Everyone said no or shook their heads. All right, thank you very much. So may we call the witness, please? Trooper Garino, please.
Same situation, as you remarkably step up, take standing, swear.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good morning, Trooper.
Good morning, everyone.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Taking you back to the other day, I have been showing you, so you had testified about some extraction reports that you had conducted from the various forensic extractions that you had done pertaining to both the defendant's phone and Mr. O'Keefe's phone, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm showing you a document, ask you to review that up when you finish.
Okay. Okay.
You recognize that, sir?
Yes, it's,
What do you recognize that to be?
sorry, KaReN ReaD's phone call logs.
And that's specifically from January 28th and January 29th, is that correct?
Yes, it starts the 28th at 12:33 to, I'm sorry, the 29th at 12:33 to 3:19 p.m. on the 29th.
And just for ease of reference, does it sort of go in descending order as far as the earlier calls are on the last page and then the more recent calls are on the first page?
Yes, that's correct.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
May we approach, please?
Okay.
So what I'm gathering is that when they approach the bench to talk to the judge, they have to mute the microphones so that no one can hear what they're saying, so the microphones don't pick up. I think what the counsel and judge talk about is confidential, maybe. Can you hear my son in the other room? I don't have a way to separate the sound, my voice, from the video on here, which they have muted. So this video is about the KaReN ReaD trial. I'm late learning about it, but my mom says that I would really enjoy it. I do enjoy law and legal proceedings, and so I'm just learning about it now, and it's pretty amazing what's going on. The prosecution wants to say that she intentionally ran over her cop boyfriend, and the defense says that it definitely she didn't do that, and now it appears that there's a whole cover-up going on with the police force in that city and the ones who were involved in that night. Here, they're back.
Yes.
Showing you another document, sir. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
This is KaReN ReaD and Carrie Roberts' call log.
And that's an extraction report that you created from the defendant's phone, is that correct?
Keep your voice up, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibit.
Okay.
No objection.
It's 6:34.
Yes, they're
May I
in the
approach again, Your
courtroom.
Honor?
Yes.
Showing you another document, sir. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
This is the chats from John O'Keefe and Chris Albert.
And again, that's an extraction report that you created from Mr. O'Keefe's phone, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibit. No objection.
Mr. Lally, you really do need to keep your voice up. It's 6:35.
And may I approach? Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you another document, sir. I ask you to look at that. Look up when you're finished.
Hi, Jaded.
Yes.
Do you recognize that, sir?
Jaded.
Yes, this is KaReN ReaD's the full chat report of everyone from the 29th on.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibit. We have no objection.
Okay. It's 6:36.
I'm sorry, may I have the last one? May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. Returning to you what's now been marked as Exhibit 636. Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I publish a portion of this to the jury?
Yes.
And sir, I'm going to direct your attention to the exhibit before you that's now been marked as Exhibit 636. And Ms. Gilman, if I could, I'm sorry, Trooper Garino and Ms. Gilman, if I could direct your attention to page 3. And do you have that before you, sir?
Yes, I do.
And on page 3, who is that a conversation with?
Laura Sullivan.
And that conversation essentially continues from page 3 to page 6, is that correct?
Yes, it does.
And sir, I'm going to ask you, similar to what I asked you the other day, if you could read from that conversation in its entirety, indicating who's speaking, content of what's being said, and the date and time associated with that message.
Yes. First message from Laura Sullivan at 12:45 p.m. on January 29th, 2022. KaReN, it's Laura. Please call me. KaReN says, hi, Laura, at 1:07 p.m. KaReN then says, John passed away, 1:07 p.m. Laura, KaReN, I'm shaking. I'm so sorry. At 1:07, KaReN says, we found him outside in the snow at 5 a.m., 1:07 p.m. Laura, I can't stop crying, 1:07 p.m. again. KaReN, thank you, 1:07. And Laura finally says, why was he out there, 1:07 p.m. Oh, sorry. KaReN replies, he left the party we were at. I don't know what time. I didn't even go in. I went to bed. That's at 1:08 p.m.
Hold on now. This is important right here. I'm kind of new to this case, but I know enough. They said he was never at the party. And so here she's saying she was there, but now she's saying she didn't go in. So maybe how would she know that he was at the party? So what happened is this woman, KaReN ReaD, is being accused of killing her cop boyfriend. But it looks like what really happened is the cops at the party killed the cop boyfriend, and they're covering it up and blaming it. Hey, Caleb, they're blaming it on KaReN ReaD. So that's why this is so interesting.
Laura says, oh my God, 1:08. KaReN, my heart breaks for, my heart breaks for everyone at 1:09 p.m.
Thank you. So in those text messages, Ms. Sullivan, in the afternoon of the 29th, she indicates to Ms. Sullivan that they located Mr. O'Keefe around 5 a.m. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Now, sir, if I could direct your attention to page 28 through 29 of those messages in the exhibit before you. In page 28 through 29, who was that conversation with?
This is KaReN ReaD and John O'Keefe.
These are conversations from the early... These conversations on page 28 through 29 of this exhibit occur in the early morning hours of January 29th, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And if you could, sir, again, please read as far as who's speaking, what they're saying, and what date and time these are being sent.
Yes. So, KaReN ReaD to John O'Keefe at 12:55 a.m. on the 29th. I'm going home. Followed by, see you later. At 1:02 a.m., she texts John again saying, your kids are cucking alone. And at 1:04 a.m., she says, I'm back in Mansfield. The kids are home alone.
Thank you. May I approach this to retreat?
Yes.
May I have a moment, Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, our legal system, the court system, of course, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but that's not usually how it goes these
May I
days.
approach?
Yes.
It's like they assume you're guilty if they want to. They really need to convict her because they don't want the police and the police force to be held accountable for this. However, the guy, one of the main guys, I think he's the one sitting right there, is under investigation by the governor of the state because he's a bad cop.
Sir, I'm showing you two documents. And Mr. Officer, we can put the light. You recognize each of those documents, sir?
Yes, one is KaReN ReaD call log report. Just want to confirm which one this is. Yeah. For John O'Keefe, and then John O'Keefe's full call log report on the, looks like the 29th.
Now, sir, if I could direct your attention to the defendant, Ms. Reed's call log reports.
Exactly.
Specifically, if I could draw your attention to what's been.
Exactly.
They're enumerated as far as certain box numbers, correct? 1 through whatever it goes on the last page.
Yes.
If I could direct your attention to boxes 113 and 114.
Yeah, lots
Okay.
and lots
See
of
those entries,
corruption, probably
Yes.
lots of
Now,
bribery.
as far as the time
threats.
related to box 113 and 114, what are the
We don't
times
know
associated
yet.
with that?
1/29/2022 at 12:36 a.m. 41 seconds, and then another one at 12:36 and 10 seconds a.m. on the 29th.
And is there any indication within that report as far as whether or not those calls are answered, those calls are missed, those calls are rejected? What's listed?
It says answered.
And we'll get to this a little bit more in a moment, but with regard to that 12:36 time, from your review of both the defendant's phone and Mr. O'Keefe's phone, is there a voicemail that the defendant left Mr. O'Keefe at that time frame?
There was a voicemail at 12:37 a.m. These ones here, it looks like they're 3 seconds and 5 seconds long.
And they're listed as answered, is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention over to Mr. O'Keefe's call report. And specifically, I'm going to ask you to direct your attention to what's been labeled as box number 134 and then 134 with the 1 in parentheses following that.
Okay?
And do you see those entries, sir?
Yes.
And what is the date and time associated with those entries in Mr. O'Keefe's records?
His records shows number 134 is 12:36, 9 seconds on the 29th, and then 134 with the 1 in the parentheses, 12:36 and 9 seconds as well, but call duration 0 seconds.
And as far as any indication on those calls, as far as whether they're answered, they're missed, they're rejected, or what are they listed as?
There's nothing. Also 133 is the same call, and that one says missed, and it's at the same timestamp of 12:36 and 9 seconds.
So the same call around the same time frame shows up in Mr. O'Keefe's report as missed and shows up in the defendant's report as answered, correct?
That is correct.
And that is around the time that the defendant is calling the victim repeatedly and leaving voicemails on Mr. O'Keefe's phone.
Yes, that's correct.
May I approach this to retrieve, Your Honor?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, you guys, for being here with me. It's fun.
Now, Trooper Guarino, you conducted an analysis of both the defendant's phone and Mr. O'Keefe's phone, correct?
That's correct.
And from your analysis of that phone, were you able to determine approximately how many calls occurred from the defendant's phone to Mr. O'Keefe's phone from the time period shortly after 12:30 a.m. To the time period shortly after 6 a.m.?
There was over 50. I think it was 53 or 55, but
And any of those calls from your review of those records indicate any sort of conversation as far as duration, as far as being labeled as answered, anything to that effect?
that Mr. O'Keefe actually picked up the phone and spoke to Ms. Reed?
Yes.
No.
Now, with regard to those phone calls from the defendant to Mr. O'Keefe, what, if anything, did you find from Mr. O'Keefe's phone in relation to voicemails left by the defendant?
There were 8 voicemails on Mr. O'Keefe's phone from the 29th till the phone was discovered. All from Ms. Reed, no one else.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
with this, sir? You recognize that?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
It's the John O'Keefe voicemails from KaReN on his phone.
From that period that we were just speaking about on January 29th?
Yes, that's correct.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to seek to introduce in the minutes the next exhibit. We have no objection.
Okay.
Now, sir, from your review of the defendant's phone, before we get to those, from your review of the defendant's phone, what, if anything, were you able to observe or ascertain that the defendant's phone did at approximately 12:36 a.m.?
So by looking at the timeline in the phone, we're able to see that Ms. Reed's phone auto-connected to John O'Keefe's Wi-Fi at his house at 12:36 a.m. We know this because it's a password-protected access to the phone, so you would have to know the password to get into this Wi-Fi network.
And that would be the home in 1 Meadows Avenue, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, if we could publish each of the 8 voicemails to the jury.
Okay. Are we going to hear which time each one is?
Yes, Your Honor. And Trooper Guarino, again, similar to the other messages, just for point of reference, the earliest of the voicemails is the last in the list, and the most recent is at the top of the list. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, as far as this first voicemail, what time did this occur?
12:37 a.m.
And with the court's permission, if I could play that for the jury.
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if you could have the second message. Sorry, Ms. Gilman, if you could pause right there, please. My apologies, Your Honor, I just wanted the siren to go by.
Oh, that's fine.
Before Ms. Gilman presses play again, Trooper Guarino, what time is this second message?
12:42.
Ms. Gilman, if you could. Now, Trooper Guarino, with reference to the third message, what time is that received?
12:59.
And again, when I say received by Mr. O'Keefe's phone, is that correct?
That's the timestamp of the voicemail in his phone, yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, with reference to that third message.
John, I'm here with your fucking kids. Nobody knows what the fuck you are, fucking pervert.
Now, the fourth message, Trooper Guarino, what time was that received by Mr. O'Keefe's phone?
1:02 a.m.
Ms. Gilman, if you could, when you're ready.
That was it.
So can we just turn the air conditioner off for just a second, please? So you just played it?
Yeah, Your Honor, there was no content. It was just like a 1 second long message.
And Trooper Guarino, with regard to the fifth message, what time was that received by Mr. O'Keefe's phone?
37, 2, 59, 1:11 a.m. Excuse me.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could.
Yeah, it's 1 in the morning. I'm with your fucking niece and nephew. You fucking pervert. You're a fucking pervert.
And the sixth message, sir, what time was that received by Mr. O'Keefe's phone?
1:18 a.m.
Gilman, if you could.
John, I'm going home. I cannot babysit your niece. I need to go home. You're fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. He's sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself.
The seventh message, sir, what time was that received by Mr. O'Keefe's phone?
5:23 a.m.
Gentlemen, if you could. The last and eighth message, sir, what time was that received by Mr. O'Keefe's phone?
6:08 a.m.
Gentlemen, if you could. Gentlemen, if you could pause there for 1 second, I'm sorry. With respect to this message received on Mr. O'Keefe's phone at 6:08 a.m., from your knowledge of the investigation, where was the defendant, who, if anyone, was with or around her at the time of this message at 6:08 a.m.?
Jenna-veev, Carrie Roberts. During the message, you can hear someone on the phone with 911.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Gilman, if you could.
Can you hear me typing? I hope not. I'm trying to write in the text box, in the chat box.
Yes, I have someone who works for 34 years ago, getting that, the anti notice now. Yeah. We're blended. I will be blended very well. Yes, I need
What are we hearing though right now? What is the sound?
Thank you
What is this supposed to be of?
Can we turn the air conditioning back on? Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's distorted and, but what, it was yelling.
Now, Trooper Guarino, in addition to the 53 phone calls that you've testified about the defendant made to Mr. O'Keefe from that time frame following 12:30 a.m. to approximately just past 6 a.m., did you note any other calls to a contact listed within the defendant's
Okay.
phone as mom?
Yes.
Thank you.
And when
Sorry.
were those calls placed?
I believe there's one at 1:10-ish in the morning. I forget the exact timestamp. There's also one at around 4:40 in the morning, and then at 4:42, right around 4 in the morning. Two of them, the first two weren't answered, and then the third phone call was answered.
Now, with respect to Ms. Reed's phone from that same time period, what, if any, phone calls did you observe to a contact listed in the defendant's phone as dad?
It's the same number, so when I looked at it, in one report, it showed as dad, and then when I looked at it in Cellbrite, it came up as mom, so I don't know how it's attributing. Maybe she has it listed twice. I never looked at her actual phone, so this is what the extraction is showing me.
Now, sir, you testified the other day that upon your review of the defendant's extraction reports, you were not able to determine there were no listed GPS locations for the defendant's phone?
Correct. Like routes or anything like that.
And that was because it was turned off in the phone, is that correct?
That would lead me to believe, yes, that location services are turned off, so,
Objection, move to strike.
So no gas. What can you tell us about that?
well, if GPS coordinates and location services on, that's what would get us locations in the phone. So if they're not there, they could be turned off.
Objection, move to strike.
No, I'll allow that.
Now, with respect to Mr. O'Keefe's phone, what, if any, analysis with respect to GPS and/or health data? Well, let me ask you this first. From your training experience and your casework with respect to forensic analysis of electronic devices, what is health data in a cell phone? How is that recorded, and what, if anything, can that tell you?
Okay, so in an iPhone, you can have health data. To use that health data, the phone, if you don't have an iWatch paired to it, is basically just a high-tech pedometer. It's just every time you move the phone, it's going to track steps, and that's if you have it turned on. If you have the iWatch on, it'll get beats per minute, and you get a much more robust health data from it.
Now, with respect to the health data and with respect to the GPS location for Mr. O'Keefe's phone, initially, what, if any, sort of analysis did you do with respect to that?
So we checked his native locations. At 12:19, the phone is, well, I should say this, at 12:12 in his location shows that he's at the Waterfall Bar. The next set of locations shows he's at Dedham Street by Cedar Crest, and then Waze is activated for 34 Fairview. So, and then it shows me his entire route to 34 Fairview.
And what is Waze, sir?
Waze is similar to Apple Maps. It is a GPS program that, you know, punch in like a Garmin type thing.
Navigation.
If I could take you back just for a moment, just to the health data from the Cellbrite extraction that you did. Specifically, you looked at data from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. on January 29, 2022, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And as far as the health data was concerned, there was some entries from 12:11 a.m. to 12:32 a.m., is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And can you describe to the jury sort of what you observed and what, if any, significance those entries had to you as far as the health data was concerned?
Yeah, so the health data shows, like I said, the phone is basically a high-tech pedometer. If you're moving it around, it's going to think you're taking steps when you might not actually be walking. His health data showed while he's driving that he's traveling and taking steps.
Objection. Move to strike.
So I need a foundation.
Mr. Guarino, over the course of this investigation and your analysis, you became aware of other witness statements, surveillance video, things of that nature as to Mr. O'Keefe's whereabouts from approximately 12 a.m. to at least 1 a.m., is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you're aware of around the time just past 6 a.m. when his
So let's hear the question first.
Oh, that's fine.
Go ahead, Mr. Wells.
You're aware of the time being just past 6 a.m. that you already testified to as to when Mr. O'Keefe was discovered and 911 was called.
Yes, that's correct.
So, sir, with respect to, again, that time period starting at 12:11 a.m., what, if anything, did you observe with respect to the health data of Mr. O'Keefe as signified within the phone?
So it marks when he's taking steps, ascending, or should say, yeah, ascending stairs, and distance traveled.
And so from that period of 12:11 to 12:32, there were essentially 4 time periods that you delineated. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you remember the precise times and sort of the distance traveled within those time frames?
I don't remember the precisely off the top of my head.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may the trooper refer to his report just for those numbers?
Do you have it with you, Trooper?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Okay.
And sir, if you could just list for the jury what you found.
Yes. So at 12:11 and 9 seconds in the morning to 12:21 and 5 seconds on the 29th, it shows that he's taking 170 steps, going 99.6 meters, or 326 feet. At, sorry. At 12:21 and 10 seconds to 12:24 and 22 seconds, it shows 80 steps and 87.74 meters, or 287 feet. At 12:21, 14 seconds to 12:24 and 37 seconds, it stated ascending, descending 3 floors. And then at 12:31, 56 to 12:32, 16 in the morning, 36 steps, 25.46 meters, or 85 feet.
Now, sir, with respect to what's listed as steps, does that indicate, from based on your training experience and familiarity with this sort of health data, what, if anything, does that tell you as to whether or not the person with the phone is physically taking steps?
That's not the case.
What is the case?
Like I said, the phone has internal measures.
Oh, sure.
The phone has internal measures in it. Like I said, it's basically a pedometer. So the movement of the phone, the distance traveled, it's going to register as steps. You don't have to physically be walking and moving the phone for it to register movement. Just waving it around and then could potentially cause it to think you're walking and moving.
You mentioned that from your review of Mr. O'Keefe's phone, you indicated there was a Waze search for 34 Fairview Road. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And if you could just explain to the jury sort of what is Waze and what kind of information are you looking at there?
Waze is a GPS program. So you put your address you're looking to go to. It's going to tell you the fastest route, where the police are, etc.
Navigation.
And when that Waze search was conducted, is there a precise time pursuant to your review of Mr. O'Keefe's phone associated with that Waze search?
Yes, it was at 12:20 in the morning.
And so from all of those steps and everything that you, if Mr. O'Keefe is searching for 34 Fairview Road, inferably he's not at 34 Fairview Road, is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, with respect to the location, can you describe to the jury, are you familiar with the term based on your training experience known as native locations?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that is?
So native locations on an iPhone, the way it pulls GPS data, it uses satellite, Wi-Fi signal, Bluetooth, location services on apps. It takes all that data and uses it to get you the best location of where you are. Unlike where you'd have like a handheld car-mounted Garmin GPS that's just using strictly satellite.
Now, from your review of that data, when that Waze search is conducted at approximately 12:20 a.m., where is Mr. O'Keefe physically located at that time?
The vehicle, or whatever they're in, is by 138 Dedham Street. They had already passed Cedar Crest Road.
And from review of that native location data, what time does the phone arrive in the area of 34 Fairview Road?
12:24 a.m.
Now, the next entry as far as the location data, when is that and where is it indicating that the phone is at that point?
It shows me it's there the entire night, right in between 32, 34 Fairview. So,
And 32, 34 Fairview, that sort of intersection of those two residences, if you know, where is that in relation to where Mr. O'Keefe was found just after 6 a.m. in the morning?
I was only going by the photos that Sergeant Good had taken and from the Canton PD cruiser cam, but that area would be within 3 feet, give or take, of the area where the GPS signals all plot for the rest of the night.
Now, Trooper Greeno, you testified the other day to a tool that you use called Axiom, is that correct?
Yes.
And with regard to the location data in the tool of Axiom, what, if anything, can you tell the jury as far as how that works and how accurate it is?
So, like Cellbrite, Axiom will also show the native locations in an iPhone. They're able to display the range of accuracy in meters, and then also the speed of the phone in meters per second.
And were you able to ascertain from using the Axiom tool and the location data for Mr. O'Keefe's phone as far as its speed in meters per second at 12:25:36 a.m.?
I don't remember it off the top of my head. Sorry.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may the trooper refer to his
Thank you.
report for the numbers?
Go ahead.
All right. It's 0.6346 meters per second and a 16.75 meter lever of accuracy. So at about 54 feet measure of accuracy.
Now, sir, if you could, just based on your training experience and your use, familiarity with this Axiom tool, and for the record, that's AXIOM, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So as far as that degree of certainty or accuracy with regard to the measurement, can you speak a little bit about that and explain that to the jury, how that works and what that means?
Yeah. So, as I said, the iPhone tries to use multiple things to get you the best area of location where you're at. I can tell from personal experience that being at 34 Fairview, it's at the bottom, Fairview, where 34 is on Fairview, it's at the bottom of a hill, and it's also at the bottom of Cedar Crest where they sort of intersect. That area there has many hills, so the GPS signal can weaken due to natural landscape, buildings, weather, multiple factors.
And as far as the degree of accuracy, what, if anything, does that tell you in regard to the location of the phone in reference to that degree of accuracy?
So it plots a point where it believes you are, and then the degree of accuracy says you could be in this bubble, but if it's way outside or way far away, it's all going to show by how well the signal strength is to the satellite. So, like I said, if it's a poor signal, it's going to blow out. It's going to show you could be in this giant circle. But as it gets better accuracy, it's going to shrink back down. It's going to say, no, you're right about here.
And to that point, or to elucidate that point that you were just speaking on, we'll get to this more in depth in a second, but at some point in 2023, did you go to 34 Fairview Road to conduct some GPS mapping?
Yes, I did.
And when you were in that area of 34 Fairview Road, what, if anything, did you observe with reference to satellite connection, cell phone connection, things of that nature as far as the strength of the signal?
So on my way to work, I actually drive Fairview quite often, and being there in person with my phone, I'll go from 4 or 5 bars of service. When I'm there, it's 1 or 2. So that tells me that strength of signal there is not great.
Anecdotal, do they have the
Turning
same
back to
exact
this,
service provider?
location data from
Same
Mr. O'Keefe's
weather,
phone.
same time of
You
day?
mentioned that it's, you testified that at
That's not
12:25,
scientific.
36 a.m. It has a certain accuracy and was traveling at a certain speed, correct?
Yes.
Now, what, if any, speed is recorded in this location data between that 12:25 a.m. and 6:15:36 a.m.?
Your Honor, may I just
Yes.
read? Thank you.
My chat box just disappeared on my thing. It turned into something else.
What time frame exactly are you looking for?
What I'm asking is, what, if any, speed was recorded by the location data between that first 12:25:36 a.m. and 6:15:36 a.m.?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking for before that. No, there's no real speed registered until the phone is found the next morning.
And so that would be at the 6:15:36 a.m. time frame, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what speed is recorded at that time at 6:15:36 in the morning?
It shows 0.24 meters per
God.
second for speed, and then with an accuracy rating of 7.58 meters, which is 24 feet.
Thanks. Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to May 8th, 2023, where did you go with relation to this investigation on that day?
I went to 34 Fairview.
And who, if anyone, went with you?
Trooper Proctor.
Now, what was the purpose of going to 34 Fairview Road on that date in May of 2023?
We wanted to take measurements of where Officer O'Keefe's body was found, and then basically a diagonal straight line to the door, how the distance that would be.
And what, if any, tools did you bring with you, and what, if anything, did you use in the course of this analysis on this day?
So I loaded in the GPS points into a program that the CERT team uses called SAR-Topo. It's a GPS mapping program that you can view through an app. So that way I was able to see exactly where I was via the app. We also used one of the big long tape measures that's in like the big thing that would get us, from where we believed his body was to the front door.
And from that, as far as the determination of where Mr. O'Keefe's body was located, what, if anything, did you use to determine that?
As I said before, the photos and video from Sergeant Good of KNPD and the KNPD cruiser cam video.
So the cruiser cam video that from Officer Sarah's cruiser, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
The one that shows where Mr. O'Keefe's body is when Officer Sarah arrives on scene, correct?
That is correct.
Now, with regard to those particular GPS points, what time frame did you start as far as your mapping was concerned?
We took the last, we mapped the entire route. So at the waterfall bar and then on from their drive on Dedham Street down to 34 Fairview.
And as far as these locations, how were they measured as far as what kind of measurements were you using in order to plot those points?
We loaded into Google Maps and just able to show it with a KMZ file to show exactly where he went.
And so what I'm asking is, as far as the GPS locations that you were recording, how were those measured as far as longitude, latitude? Is that how they were measured?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, latitude and longitude.
And
Coordinates,
you
they're
started,
called.
with Mr. O'Keefe,
Exact
at
coordinates.
the Waterfall Bar in Canton. What time was that, if you know?
12 a.m. was the last point.
And then that time frame when Mr. O'Keefe's native locations are putting him in the area of 34 Fairview Roads, when was that first time frame?
The time he arrives?
Yes.
About 12:24, I forget the seconds, but 12:24 a.m.
Now, eventually, when you had all of these points as far as the direction of travel, location data, all of those things, what, if anything, were you then able to do with those GPS locations?
I cross-referenced them with his health data and also mapped it out to see exactly where he would be.
Now, with respect to the data that you were able to recover, if you could describe to the jury sort of the path of travel, starting with the waterfall as far as where Mr. O'Keefe's phone was, where it traveled, and where you noted it at various time points along that sequence.
Okay. So, as I said, 12:12, it's at the waterfall bar. Then there's a 7-minute break in location data. When the phone comes back up with location data at 12:19, as I said, he's by Dedham Street and Cedar Crest Road. At 138 Dedham Street, right around there, 12:20 a.m., 34 Fairview is put into Waze. He then proceeds down Dedham Street, takes a left onto Oakdale Road. It goes to the end of Oakdale, takes a left onto Maplecroft, As he's going by Maplecroft and Pinecone Road, right around 12:22 and 14 seconds, was a data point listed that he's ascending, descending the stairs. So he's over a half mile away from 34 Fairview at this point. They go down Maplecroft, take a right onto Cedar Crest, all the way down Cedar Crest. They do not turn onto Fairview Road. It goes by Fairview, does a 3-point turn or turns around somehow, and then goes back to Fairview and takes a right, where it finally stops between 34 and 32 Fairview.
So at the time that health data is being recorded, and you cross-reference the GPS data with the health data from Mr. O'Keefe's phone, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so at the time that the phone has that recording of the health data descending, and is it ascending or descending, or how does that read in the health data?
I have in my report, and that's what's copied from the thing. It's ascending/descending stairs.
And at that point in time, cross-referencing that health data with the GPS location, where physically is Mr. O'Keefe's phone at that particular time frame?
Maplecroft by Pinecone Road, right at that intersection.
And has Mr. O'Keefe's phone arrived or been in the area as far as the GPS, specifically of 34 Fairview Road?
At that time?
Yes.
No, not at all.
And so from the GPS locations that you observed of the defendant's phone initially, the phone passes by Fairview Road and then reverses direction to come back, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And then as far as between 12:25 a.m. and 6:15 a.m., there's no movement of that phone, correct? Yes. What, if any, movement did you observe following 12:25 a.m. until the period of 6:15 a.m.?
None until it was found at 6:15.
Now, you mentioned that you took a tool and you did some measurements as well, is that correct?
Yes.
And were you able to ascertain then some GPS locations for where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found?
Yes.
And what, if any, measurements, the accuracy of those GPS measurements and latitude and longitude, what was the accuracy of that?
Can I read the exact? Okay. All right. So from 12:25 and 30 seconds to about 12:35 and 36 seconds, the GPS accuracy is tight on him for the first few seconds and then blows out and encompasses pretty much the neighborhood, 34 Fairview, 32, 31, and I'll read the exact. It's 12:25 and 30 seconds. It has a 33-meter degree of accuracy, which is about 100 feet. That area encompasses 32, 34, and 31 Fairview. 12:25, 31, it's 200-foot measure of accuracy that hits 31, 32, 34 Fairview, basically almost all the houses around. 32 seconds, shrinks back down to 95-foot level of accuracy, hitting 32, 34 Fairview and the front yard of 31. At 33 seconds, it's 88 feet, again shrinking back in as the signal gets better, covering 32, 34 Fairview, 72 feet at 34 seconds, 59 feet at 35 seconds, and then 52 feet at 36 seconds. So, as I said, signal weakens, it blows out, and then as signal gets stronger, it shrinks back in. The GPS coordinates themselves are all still right where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found.
And so as far as, if I can take it back just for a second, the initial GPS coordinates that you marked as far as where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found, how accurate was that measurement as far as to itself where it was?
From what we had and then where we marked from, we believe we're in about 3 feet because standing there, even with the app, it's not perfect. I'm not getting a direct saying that I'm right on it. So we believe we were within about 3 feet of exactly where he was found.
And from that air distance of within 3 feet of where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found, how far was that, or how far did you measure that to be from the front door of 34 Fairview Road?
In a direct straight line to the front door, 72 feet. Not accounting the stairs.
Now, from your review of that data that you were talking about from that 12:35 12:35 and 12:25 and 30 seconds through 12:25 and 36 seconds when it fluctuates. What time period of that is, or what time period of any of the times that you observed is it possible that John O'Keefe was actually anywhere near 34 Fairview Road, the house?
Objection.
Ask it differently.
Within those fluctuating circles of GPS data that you were talking about, what time period did those encompass the actual inside of the residence of 34 Fairview Road?
It's about 3 seconds where it actually encompasses the inside of Fairview. That fourth second, it's right on the edge of the corner of the house. And then the fifth and sixth second, they're just showing the front yard.
And that time period, as far as those GPS data from those circles, with reference to the following time periods after those, what, if any, based on your training experience, what, if any, opinions were you able to draw from sort of that data?
So he would have to go from the GPS point that's listed. It would take him, a second and a half to get to the house, and then a second and a half back where his body was found, where his phone was underneath him. He'd have to go about 48 feet a second when I did a velocity calculation, which is about 32 miles an hour. A second to the house, a second back. There was no GPS points ever showing inside the home, the backyard of the home. There's no lat and long listed. It's just the degree of accuracy from the GPS signal.
So the 72 feet from where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found to the front door of 34 Fairview Road, in order for him to be inside of 34 Fairview Road during any of those measured timeframes, he would have to travel 72 feet and 1.5.
The objection sustained. The objection sustained.
Am I
Sir,
making
again, if
too
I could
much
ask
noise?
you
I hope not.
from Mr. O'Keefe's health data, as far as his specific physical location at the time that it indicates ascending and descending, how far away from 34 Fairview Road was it when it registered that?
It's over a half mile away. So Maplecroft to Pinecone Road.
In your opinion, sir, at any point in time, from the data that you reviewed, did Mr. O'Keefe enter 34 Fairview Road?
I'll sustain the objection.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
The only thing he can say is, I can't be sure. Literally. He can't be sure because the degree of accuracy in the hills and he loses signal and it could jump here and jump there and...
Showing you a series of documents, that you review those and look up when you're finished.
Okay.
Do you recognize those, sir?
Yes.
And what do you recognize those to be?
These are the plotted points I did through Google Earth.
Bye, Jaded.
The maps, and then
We'll see you tomorrow. I
the-
hope you stop in again.
through LexisNexis, the track
Thanks for
system.
hanging out.
The GPS range and coordinates.
And the LexisNexis track system, if you could explain just a bit to the jury as far as what that is and how it's used to create these documents before you.
It's similar to that Sartopo program I used. It's a desktop-based GPS program. You put the points in, and then it will map them out and create,
Did it again.
like I said, a KMZ file for you, so you can load it into Google Earth.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Almost teaching.
Okay.
Objection.
Thank you.
I have a hard time with this.
May I return to the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
With the court's permission, may I publish this, jury?
Yes.
That's me concentrating.
Ms.
We
Gilman,
didn't do
if you
this
take
when I
that
was your
down.
age.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
May I stand up?
fact, Trooper, if you're more comfortable standing for some of your testimony, you certainly can.
Thank you, Holly.
Chairman, if you could enlarge that just a bit. Thank you. Now, Trooper, there should be a laser pointer up on the stand before you. If you could, first of all, let me just ask you, recognize what's up on the screen now as the next exhibit?
Yes.
And again, if you could just explain to the jury sort of what we're looking at in this slide, and then using that laser pointer, if you could, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you have in this particular slide.
So I took an overview of the town of Canton. So this here is the GPS route, and then down over, I can barely see, let me just look on the map here. It's not much better. The waterfall bar is right up, I can't really tell honestly from this, but it's on Washington Street. That's it's down here, I'm sorry. That's why I included an overview of everything so you could see the full range from the time period with that GPS locations.
Your Honor, if I may, just if it's possible, I don't know.
Keep your voice up.
I'm sorry. I don't know if this is going to work any better, but if I could ask if we could turn the lights back on just so the witness can see
Sure.
what's before him, and then. With the court's permission, I think the map is still viewable to the jury, and now the witness can actually see the exhibit.
Can everybody see it?
And so again, sir, Trooper, I'm sorry. Now with visible before you, if you could just indicate again what we're looking at in this.
Yep. So when you zoomed in, it actually closed it out, but it's down over here is the waterfall bar. There's a couple of points there listed. And then right around here is when the GPS tracks go, and their route, once Waze is activated, down to 34 Fairview. There is a zoomed in version of 5 Fairview.
And Ms. Cameron, if I could have the next slide.
So,
Sir, what are we looking at in this slide?
yep. So this is the track. This one shows the 12:22, 12:22 and 14 second GPS point where the, right here where the little arrow is. That's exactly where they were when the phone is registering the ascending, descending stairs, like listed in Cellbrite.
If you could, using that laser pointer to illustrate to the jury where that point is in relation to where 34 Fairview Road is.
Yes. So this is where they were with the ascending, descending stairs. They would go, continue down through this little piece here, take the right onto Cedar Crest. They continue down Cedar Crest, missing Fairview right here, and then turn back around and then come to the house.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next slide. And Trooper, what are we looking at in this slide, and specifically, if you could?
I do have to say, though, real quick, okay? Because I think this is important. Hold on one second. Okay. That they went down and turned around and came back. My guess is if she was dropping him off, right? Didn't she drop him off? She went down and turned around so that she could drop him off maybe like right at the street level. Like, so his passenger door was at the end of the driveway. Did she pull in the driveway? See, I don't know. I'm just starting with this case, but I don't like starting things in the middle. It gives me a lot of anxiety, but I'm doing it anyway. But I would think that a good mom, she's taking care of the kids. Women, they're maternal, right? It doesn't matter if we're your actual mom or your aunt or your girlfriend or your wife. We're naturally maternal. And I would do the same thing. I would go down, turn around, and pull up to the driveway and drop him off right with the passenger door lined up with the drive if I wasn't going to pull in. Maybe she actually missed the turn. I don't know. Just my little, oops, what happened? Hold on. Okay, hold on. Now let me fire that up again.
Explain to the jury as far as the blue circle with the attached to the left.
If you could look this way, please.
Attached to the LexisNexis tracks, if you could explain to the jury what that is and what that signifies in this.
Yes, so as I said, we loaded this in through LexisNexis, and it gave us the GPS points for the route. The point is 348. I just want to double check. Yeah, point 348 is at 12:25 and 30 seconds. The blue circle is the estimated range, so how well the signal for the GPS is. And 34 Fairview is right pretty much by that L.
Chairman, if I could have the next slide.
Yeah, there we go.
Trooper, is this essentially the same image, a little bit closer without the graphic as far as the LexisNexis?
That's correct. This is 34 Fairview right here, 32, and then again, this is where all the points are for the duration.
As far as the blue circle that's up on the screen, what does that represent as far as this particular point in time for this GPS point 348 at 12:25 and 30 seconds?
Yes, this is as I said before, the range of accuracy due to satellite strength. So as I said, it blows out as it loses strength, and then will come back in as it gets better signal.
Gentlemen, if I could have the next slide. Again, Trooper, what's up on the screen? What are we looking at this as far as 12:25:31?
Same area where the 348 is. This is part 351. Again, as you can see, strength of signal blows out and encompasses almost the whole neighborhood. All the houses around.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next slide. And again, sir, is this the same GPS point of 351, number 351 at 12:25 and 31 seconds?
Yes, it is.
And if you could, again, just explain to the jury what we're looking at in this slide.
Same thing, just the degree of accuracy and the strength of the satellite signal to Officer O'Keefe's phone.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next slide. And again, sir, if you could explain to the jury what we're looking at in this slide and what time frame we're talking about.
Yep, this is point 349 at 32 seconds. Again, latitude and longitude, they're all right in the same area, and that's that.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next slide. Again, Trooper Guarino, is this the same GPS plotting point in the same time frame of 12:25, 32 seconds?
Yes, it is.
And again, if you could explain to the jury what we're looking at in this, in particular in relation to the earlier slides with reference to the accuracy that you were talking about.
Yeah. So again, the accuracy blew out as it lost signal, and now it's shrinking back in as accuracy gets better.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next slide. And sir, what GPS point or what time frame are we looking at in this particular slide?
It's 12:25 and 33 seconds. Again, same area, lat long, right in the yard of 34 Fairview.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next slide. And Trooper Guarino, is this the same GPS point of number 348 and 12:25 and 33 seconds?
That's correct.
And again, if you could explain to the jury as far as the accuracy and what we're looking at in this.
Yep. So I believe they actually wasn't that much of a drop off. Yeah. So it went from 88 feet to 72 feet. So the circle still doesn't look like it really shrank much.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next slide, please. And again, Trooper, what time frame and what GPS point are we looking at in this one?
This is 12:25 and 34 seconds. Again, same thing right there, the corner of 34 Fairview and 32 Fairview.
Gentlemen, if I could have the next slide, please. Trooper Guarino, this is the same GPS point number 350, 12:25 and 34 seconds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And again, if you could, using that laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what we're looking at in this.
Yep. So 34 Fairview is here. So as I said, this point here is the last one where it sort of cuts out the little corner of the house, but everything's still showing directly. This is where it's believed to be.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next slide. And what GPS point and what time are we looking at in this one, sir?
This one's 35 seconds, 12:25, 35 seconds. Same thing, again. GPS point's still saying it's right there where his body was, but again, it dropped from 72 feet of Act Street down to 59 feet. So it's going to show the outside only of the house.
So the signal strength is strengthening at that point, is that correct?
That is correct.
If I could have the next slide, Ms. Gilman. And again, sir, same GPS pointer number 346, the same time at 12:25:35, is that correct?
Is correct.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next slide. Mr. Pecorino, with regard to this slide, what GPS point is being depicted and what time frame are we looking at?
This is GPS point number 345, and it's 12:25 and 36 seconds. Again, showing that the signal strength has, again, grown and gotten better.
As far as grown and gotten better, what accuracy or what degree of accuracy in feet are we looking at?
This is within 52 feet.
Ms. Gilman, lastly, from this group, the next slide. And again, sir, this is the same as the previous slide, GPS point number 345, 12:25 and 36 seconds.
That's correct.
And again, if you could, using the laser pointer, just to illustrate to the jury what we're looking at.
Yep.
I do have to say, you know, this, okay, so they know the position of the phone. You know, these cops, if there was a cover up, these cops would have probably met him in the yard when he arrived, left the phone right there, done whatever they wanted to do to him, and then tossed him back out in the front yard. Or maybe it happened right there in the front yard. You know, maybe she dropped him off, and as he was walking up to the party, he was attacked by a bear. Apparently, he was attacked by a large animal. So maybe he was attacked by a bear or a bobcat or something. So we know the position, the location of his phone. Okay, this is all that tells us. We don't know that he had his phone on his body, on his person. Okay, it's really, really important not to make assumptions. This shows the position of his phone.
As I said, there's any plotted points anywhere other than right in this area for the rest of the night. This is where it stays, and there's varying degrees of accuracy, but there's nothing ever showing it anywhere else in that neighborhood.
May I approach, John?
Yes.
You have that
Oops.
last document, or-
I just gave it
I
back.
forgot
If you could take a look at that and look up when you finish.
Yep.
Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, this is a second
Right.
map I created with the Cellbrite locations from their native locations. The previous one was from Axiom. So I used both programs to map it.
Why did you use both programs, sir?
As I said, Axiom showed movement and degree of accuracy where Cellbrite doesn't. It just gives you the native locations. I use two programs so I can corroborate what I'm seeing in one is the same as the other, because if not, then I need to find out why.
And as far as the information from one program to the other program, were they corroborative of each other?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to seek to introduce and admit the next exhibit. No objection.
Okay. As one?
Yes. May I return to the witness room?
Yes.
With the court's permission, may we publish this to the jury?
Yes, with the lights on still?
I think so. I think it's, thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Pecorino, starting with the first page that you have before you, first of all, do you recognize what's up on the screen as the first page of that next exhibit?
Yes, sir.
And again, if you could, using the laser pointer you have before you, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you observe in this first page of this next exhibit.
Yes, again, this is from the Waze app. They're tracked from 234 Fairview, down Cedar Crest, again, returning back here. So that's just the bottom half. I
Okay,
just wanted to
I see
get
what
a
happened.
closer view of where the GPS.
So they actually did miss the turnoff down the actual road. I thought maybe they went down like to a cul-de-sac area and turned around, came the other way to drop him off. Nope.
Plots were from Cellbrite.
And the next slide, Ms. Gillen. And again, sir, if you could explain to the jury what we're looking at in this particular slide.
So the purple dots are the GPS points and the route taken. As I said, goes up to, I believe that's 51 Cedar Crest, and then reverses back. And then this is the final point, it's right here. 34 Fairview's right here, there's a little yellow push pin on it.
And again, sir, I'm sorry, just from the timing of the plotting of the points, purple dots that you have there, if you could just, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to the path that Mr. O'Keefe's phone takes in reference. If I could ask you first, if you could just illustrate to the jury this particular slide, where is 34 Fairview?
Right here.
And then if I could ask you with the laser pointer to direct the jury's attention to the path of Mr. O'Keefe's phone in sequence, sort of how it travels and arrives at that location.
Yep. As I shown, goes down Cedar Crest, misses Fairview, goes up to here by the house with the pool, turns around, comes back, takes a right onto Fairview, and then stops ultimately right in between 34 and 32 Fairview, where I think there's like a flagpole and a fire hydrant right there.
Tell me if I could have the next slide. And Trooper Carino, directing your attention to this slide, what are we looking at?
Again, I cross-referenced it with the points. This is Pine Cone Road, and then Maplecroft intersects here. And this is the ascending, descending stairs point in his phone. Doing a Google Earth elevation check. There's about a 20-degree dip, and then it goes up. And then as you go down Cedar Crest, the hill is about a 50-foot elevation change again. So it's pretty significant.
And so I'm sorry, sir, as far as the elevation change that you're talking about, how is that measured and how and where is that in reference to what's depicted up here?
So again, like I said, in this area here, there's about a 20-foot drop, and then as you go down Cedar Crest, that hill, it's about 50 feet. This spot here is the ascending, descending stairs. So as I said before, he doesn't have an iWatch on, so it's not collecting that great health data. It's still acting as a pedometer. So again, whatever movement he's doing is triggering something in the phone as he's ascending and descending these hills. Essentially, it could be tricking the phone into thinking it's stairs.
Let's come in if I could have the next slide. And, Trooper Carino, what are we looking at in this one?
This timestamp is 12:19 and 32 seconds. That's when the phone initially starts creating the GPS points before Waze is activated with 34 Fairview searched. So this looks to be the time Waze is actually opened up.
And so from the purple dots that are depicted on the screen, as far as where is Mr. O'Keefe's phone at 12:19 a.m. in reference to 34 Fairview?
12:19 is right here. 34 Fairview is down all the way here. Number, you can't really see, but it's right in the bottom corner.
And the next slide,
This is the same map, but just minus the tracks. Graphic.
I'm sorry, Trooper, I lost track of what page we're on. Is there any other pages in that exhibit before you?
No, that's the last one.
May I approach this to retrieve your arm?
Yes.
Your arm, may we approach?
Okay.
There we go. So here is the map. Now, where is it? Oh, I see. Okay. Here's the map. I pulled this up myself on Google Maps, and they're talking about right here. So they drove down this road, went a little past it, came back, and went up
We
here.
know we're going to take our morning break. You, of course, have to stick around, but you should file out when the jury does. So jurors, the lawyers and I have something that we have to do, so it'll be a little bit longer. I hear it's nice and cool back in the jury deliberation room. So we're gonna take a half an hour, 45-minute break here.
Okay, we're not. We're not.
To write a police.
Maybe we will because the lawn crew is here. We'll just wait for the lawn crew to pass. I know there's nobody on right now, but me and Gigi probably. So we'll just. This is from earlier, so we'll skip ahead as soon as the lawn people are done outside my window. I do find this kind of stuff interesting. Let me give you that map again. I can put it right on top of everything like this. So let me try to expand it out. Uh-oh, I don't want to do that. Here's the map. Okay, so yeah. Let me zoom it out a little bit more. What's that? 1 second. Okay, they turned off their blowers. So here's the map. These are trees. Apparently there's an elevation somehow right here. And they're trying to say that disrupts the accuracy. Where did I put the map? Here it is. Let me expand this out. And let's look at the terrain. Make sure I've got this centered. I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down. And let's find, I'm going to be using this box right there, and we'll find out if we can see this terrain right here. This should show us, but it really doesn't give us much detail. Street view. We do like a street view. Oops. Put me down. Let's go. Yes. Oh, okay. So I know I'm trying to do that. There we go. This is the wrong street though. We need to be here. We need to be here. That's 21 Fairview. What was the address? And this is Old Ridge. Let's see where Stay there. We're going to move this back. Hold on. Did that mess it up? Hold on one second. We're going to back up this one to the map. I think he said 32 Fairview. So let's look back at the map. Let's see. Okay, we're going the wrong way. Okay, I do see it's a little hilly. Okay. Look at. They're not really going to let you see the house because of the case. We get it. Look at, they need to really do their road. So they're saying he was found like kind of over here somewhere. Maybe he was just attacked by an animal, you guys. I mean, is it possible that nobody killed him and he was literally attacked by an animal? Or does that sound crazy talk? Oh. Okay, it's 34 Fairview. Let me go back. Let's go. Okay. Now it says 34. That's 33. And that, so that was it. Well, maybe this is it right here. That's also, which side of the road is it? It's either this one. Is this 34? They've got a big old privacy fence in front of their house. I wouldn't be surprised. So maybe he was like found over here by the fire hydrant or something. That's 31. That's 34. So it seems like maybe this is it. Or it looked like it was the house on this side of the street. This is still 34. That's 33. Is this 34 right here? That says 33, I think. So you can see, can't see that house. Uh-oh. I'm guessing it's this one right here. Let's go back to the street view. Oops, what did I do? Person. Okay. Oh, it's a nice little neighborhood. Now I'm at 17. Now I'm at 30. I'm at 31. 30, 34. So I think this is it. And maybe he was mauled by a dog. Maybe not. Okay, let's see. Pretty neighborhood. Okay, you can't see it. Right here. There we go. Sorry, I didn't know you were watching, and I didn't know. Okay, I did know we were the only ones on. So here's the map. And I believe they came up this way. And that the house is on the opposite, on the same side of the street that she dropped him off. And then she continued forward. And like I was saying, just because they found his phone over here somewhere here, that's the location of his phone. It doesn't mean that's the location of his person. They could have been hiding back here, or a wild animal could have come out and messed him up, like a bear. I don't know. But it's very important to not assume that just because his phone is right there, that he was right there. It wouldn't be that difficult to figure out that one of the key pieces of evidence would be the location of the phone. So let's make sure the location of the phone stays put, and then we'll put him back where he belongs. I mean, it's not a unheard of, you know. I mean, these are people in law enforcement who've seen it all, right? Let's skip ahead now, shall we? Because I really wanted to see that. We're going to now go right back into the courtroom. Well, the phone ended up under his dead body, or his dead body ended up on top of his phone that had been there all along. His phone might have been there all along, while his body might have been moved, or maybe he was ended right there. But we can only assume the location of his phone, not the location of his body, nor the time frame of the location of his body. Just saying. That is not written into the GPS locator. When we have chips in our hands and stuff, that's a different story. All right, am I talking too loud? Let's go back into the courtroom and watch the rest of the trial. Let's see. Come on, let's do it. I don't know what's going on. Oh. Oops. So are you saying I can't rewind it and watch it? Because that's my whole thing. Is it blocking me? I can't watch it? Well, now what? Okay, so I have to go to Court TV and see the not live stream, right? The replay.
The accuracy.
right, so jurors,
Oh my
when we were
God.
doing scheduling, and I know scheduling has changed a lot in this case, but my main goal is to get this case to you folks by next week, when we all want the case, to you by next week. So originally on the 21st, we were either going to do a whole day, and then we couldn't do a whole day, and there was all of this back and forth, and it was a half a day, and it was because I had something scheduled in this courthouse that was not going to be continued. Through forces that we weren't aware of, it is going to be continued tomorrow. So in light of that, I would like us, and we will be doing a whole day. I understand that for one of you, you planned on an earlier start to the weekend or a
Stat?
vacation day or something from the
Okay.
afternoon on. But really, all I'm asking of you is to go from, instead of a 1 o'clock stop, to a 4 o'clock stop. And where I guess 14 of you are able to do that, we're going to do that. So tomorrow will be a full day. Okay, I don't know who I'm inconveniencing, but I apologize for that. Because when I said emergency, an early start for the weekend was not an emergency. All right, could we call the witness back, please?
Trooper, same thing, just be mindful when you step up, and you remain under oath.
Thank you. No, it's okay.
All right, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So with reference to this case, this investigation, who, if anyone, besides
Sorry, the
you,
lawn crew's back. They'll be
created
quick.
any Cellbrite reports or extractions from any of the phones involved in this case?
Other than the AG's office, it was just myself.
And now you had mentioned that there was some deleted material from the defendant's phone from the afternoon of January 29th, 2022. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what was that was deleted?
There was some search items that were not there in the phone, but found cookies related to said searches and websites visited.
So as far as search terms or web history, were those the areas that were deleted?
Yes, that's correct.
I have nothing further. Your Honor.
Oh, okay.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, so we brought you back for that, Trooper. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Your next witness, Mr. Lally.
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth called Dr. Renee Stonebridge to the stand.
Okay.
So is Lally defense or prosecution? I got maybe that he's the prosecution. Lally?
If you could please watch your step, face the clock.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes. Thank you.
So
Afternoon.
once you sit, I'm going to tell you that you have to keep your voice up. We want to keep our air conditioning on, so just if you'd speak loudly into the microphone, that would be great. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lally.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Yes, my name is Renee Stonebridge, last name Stonebridge, Stonebridge.
And what do you do for work?
I am employed through the Chief Medical Examiner's Office at Boston as Director of Cardiac and Neuropathology and Medical Examiner.
Now, if I could ask you just a few questions about sort of your educational and work history background, if that's all right.
Yes.
Starting with your bachelor's degree, where did you go and what, if any, area did you receive a degree in?
So I went to SUNY at Stony Brook in New York. I was a double major in biology and Germanic languages and literature. I graduated with a bachelor's of science degree. After that, I went to the American University of Antigua for medical school, and I graduated with honors, magna cum laude. After that, I did a 4-year combined anatomic and clinical pathology residency program at NYU Winthrop Hospital in Long Island, New York. After that, I did a 1-year forensic pathology fellowship at the Boston office of the chief medical examiner. And after that, I did a 2-year neuropathology fellowship program through Brown University at Rhode Island Hospital.
And doctor, are you board certified?
Yes, I am board certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, forensic pathology, and neuropathology.
And if you could just explain to the jury a little bit about what does board certified mean?
Board certification means that every medical specialty has their own board. So for example, the American Board of Pathology dictates whether or not you can be board certified based on certain criteria. So you have to meet certain criteria, meaning that you have to complete a certain number of surgical specimens, a certain number of autopsies, and then once you meet that criteria, you can take an exam, which, if you pass, leads to your board certification.
Now, if I could ask you just a couple, and your board certification is up to date at this point, is that correct?
Yes.
In each of those areas that you just spoke of?
Yes.
Now, if I could ask you some general terms as far as if you could define them for the jury. First of all, what is pathology in a general sense?
Pathology is essentially the study of any sort of disease or abnormal state of the body tissues. So anything that can go wrong in the body and any of the body systems is essentially the study of pathology.
And now, starting with anatomic pathology, what is anatomic pathology more specifically?
Anatomic pathology consists of the study of surgical specimens. So for example, if someone goes to the hospital to have a tumor removed, that specimen will go to pathology. The pathologist will look at it, cut it, look at specimens under the microscope, order any ancillary tests if necessary, and then make a diagnosis, which is then conveyed to the clinician. Anatomic pathology also consists of cytopathology, which is looking at individual cells. And then it also consists of autopsy pathology.
And as far as clinical pathology, what does that mean?
Clinical pathology is anything that is lab-related in pathology. So if you have to get blood drawn and then the results come back, that is clinical pathology. If there's any sort of blood work that needs to be done, for example, if you're going to have a surgery and they have to cross-match and type you in case of a blood transfusion, that's considered clinical pathology. Also microbiology, so anything infectious. So essentially anything that goes through a lab is clinical pathology.
And what is forensic pathology?
Forensic pathology is the study of autopsies in a medical legal sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be something that is legal. Sometimes it may be just a person who has not seen a doctor in many years, dies at home, there's no physician that is willing to sign a death certificate. So we work on those types of cases, plus anything that is non-natural.
Now, neuropathology, what is that?
Neuropathology is the study of the brain, spinal cord, eyes, muscles, and nerves.
And if you could, just again in general terms, as far as casework is concerned, related to your work as a director of the neuropathology, can you explain to the jury sort of what it is that you do with respect to neuropathology?
Yes, so my job primarily entails me to be a consultant for the medical examiners. So the medical examiners have a certain set of criteria that they follow in order to determine whether or not a brain needs to be saved for a neuropathologic analysis. So upon following that criteria, if the brain is saved, it gets put into formalin, which essentially fixes the brain so it firms it up, so it makes it easier to analyze. So after the brain has been fixed, I usually let them fix about 2 weeks. Sometimes it could be a little more, a little less, depending on circumstances. I will then look at the brain, take photographs of it from all sides, and then cut the brain, take photographs, document any sort of abnormalities. And then if I feel the need to take sections to look at under the microscope, then I will take those sections. They will be processed through histology. I will look at the slides. Sometimes you may have to add in additional testing, for example, immunohistochemistry, to see if there's anything in particular that you cannot maybe diagnose solely on looking at the histology. And then once that is done, I will issue a report to the medical examiner, and then they use it in terms of determining their cause and manner of death, if necessary.
Now, as far as that formalin process, as far as the solution is concerned, is there a typical time period that the brain would have to be in that solution prior to you examining it or cutting it or any of those other things?
Usually about 2 weeks, give or take maybe a few days here and there, but I usually try to let them fix at least 10 days minimum.
And again, in general terms, with respect to the types of cases that are referred to you, what types of cases are typically referred to you?
So part of the criteria that we use is that any cases for children or babies under the age of 2 years, those always come to me. Also, if there is any cases that have blunt head trauma that may be suspicious or homicidal in nature, those will typically come to me as well. Some of the other cases may be just difficult neuropathologic entity that a non-neuropath trained medical examiner may not be able to really diagnose. And then sometimes there's cases that are just surprise cases where the medical examiner opens up the head and they see something interesting or abnormal, and they decide to save that case for me to look at further.
Now, with respect to the cases that you do see, at some point did you become involved in analysis or testing of a brain belonging to John O'Keefe?
Yes.
And who was the doctor that was the medical examiner that made that referral in this case?
It was Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello.
And with respect to your analysis here, obviously you looked at the brain. What, if any, other sources of information did you review or did you look at in ultimately formulating your opinion in this case?
So at the time when I was able to cut the brain of Mr. O'Keefe, I had information that was relayed to us from our intake department. So when a case gets called into the medical examiner, it gets taken by the intake department and they're given kind of just a rough summary of the case. I also had the police report, I had the EMS report, I had the medical records from when Mr. O'Keefe was in the hospital. I also had medical records from the primary care physician. I had autopsy photos, and I also had, I believe just refer to my notes here because I had a lot of notes. I also had the inventory and tracking sheets, which are notes created by the medical examiner, and the neuropath request itself.
Now, are you familiar with some terms in relation to injuries that you would observe as far as from a neuropathological perspective, as far as injuries being acute, subacute, or remote?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what those are and what those mean?
So it depends on circumstances. Acute generally is something that happened within a very short time frame. So when I refer to something as being acute, I usually refer to that as something that's occurring from the time of an injury to maybe a day or so afterwards. As I said, it's variable dependent on circumstances. Subacute is something that has not happened within the last few minutes, few hours, maybe even a day, and maybe something that is now in the process of healing. And then chronic is usually something that has happened a while ago in the past. You may see some sort of evidence of some type of injury in a chronic state. You may also not see any evidence because it may have completely healed by that point.
And so from your analysis in this case, how did you characterize, in your opinion, from everything that you reviewed as far as the injuries you observed in Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
The injuries I observed were acute injuries, meaning that they probably occurred minutes to hours.
Now, if I could turn your attention to your findings as far as when you conducted your analysis and your testing in this particular case, what, if anything, did you find as far as injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
So when I look at the brain, what I do is I look at all surfaces from all sides. And one of the things that I look for is anything grossly obvious, meaning anything I can look at the brain and see that there's something there that shouldn't be there. So one of the first things I noticed was a subarachnoid hemorrhage. And subarachnoid hemorrhage is something that occurs when you have bleeding within the leptomeninges. The leptomeninges are a very thin membrane that encase the brain and the spinal cord, and there should not be blood freely floating within the leptomeninges. So if you have a subarachnoid hemorrhage, most of the time, the causes are either a ruptured aneurysm, which is something I would see upon cutting the brain, or some type of trauma. So that was the first finding.
Can I stop you there just for a second? Of those taking notes and for our court reporter, could you spell the type of hemorrhage and the membrane?
Yes. Subarachnoid is SUBARACHNOID. And leptomeninges, LEPTOMENINGES.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now, with regard to anything related to the aneurysm that you indicated that you would have seen, what, if anything, did you see during the course of your review or testing or analysis of Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
So aneurysms are typically seen in the cerebral vessels that sit around the base of the brain. So there's something called the circle of Willis, which is the main arterial supply. It sits around the base of the brain, and it's kind of shaped like a circle that has vessels that come off that extend to other areas of the brain. So typically, if there is an aneurysm that is ruptured, it's going to be located somewhere in one of those vessels. So upon observing those vessels, I did not see any evidence of any aneurysm or any sort of natural disease state that might have led to a rupture in one of these vessels. Also, sometimes these vessels, since they do go deep into the brain, you may only see the rupture upon cutting the brain. And I did not see any evidence of any rupture of any of these vessels anywhere in the brain.
Now, as far as the subarachnoid hemorrhage that you observed, where was that located within the brain, and if you could?
So the subarachnoid hemorrhage was on the frontal poles, which is essentially right here in the front of the brain. So the frontal lobes obviously sit in the front, and then the poles are the very frontmost portion of the brain. So it was on the frontal poles. It was also on the left temporal pole. So the temporal region is right here in the temporal region, and because of the way that the temporal lobe is shaped, it kind of has a little loop right in the front, so it has a pole as well. So it was on the left temporal pole, and then it was also in the left lateral fissure. So you have a frontal pole here, you have the temporal lobe right here, and then the lateral fissure goes kind of in between the temporal and the frontal lobes. So you have the hemorrhage here, and then hemorrhage right there. So it's kind of all concentrated almost in one area. But then there was also hemorrhage of the posterior surface of the right temporal as well, so on this side.
Now, doctor, I'm probably going to butcher this horribly, but just as far as the bilateral unci, are you familiar with that?
Yes, so the unci are the medial portion of the temporal lobes. So the brain is essentially oriented in a way that each hemisphere, the right and left hemisphere, are the same. The unci are the most inner portion of the temporal lobes. So the unci sit just next to the brainstem. So if you have anything that causes herniation of these unci, they start to push inwards onto the brainstem. So say this is the brainstem, here are the unci, they start to push in. And because the brain is within the skull is hard, you have no room for any sort of expansion of the brain. If there is herniation, it will start to push in that area because the brainstem turns into the spinal cord and goes out of the skull through the foramen magnum. So you have this hole about this big or so, at the base of the skull where the brainstem turns to the spinal cord, then comes out. So that's one of the only areas in which the brain can actually move because it's encased in the hard skull. So if you have herniation, it'll start to push and then push downwards.
Could I ask you to spell on
UNCI.
And with reference to this bilateral unsi area, what, if any, herniation did you observe?
So when the unsi herniate, it can be subtle. Sometimes if it's herniated enough, you may see hemorrhages in the brainstem. And this happens because this tissue is now pushing on the brainstem and it's essentially being compressed. So there was herniation noted, and then there was hemorrhage within the brainstem.
Now, if I could ask you, doctor, just to be familiar with the term or medical term known as a contusion,
Yes.
and can you explain just in general terms to the jury what you understand that term to mean?
So a contusion is essentially a bruise. It's blood that's coming out from a blood vessel. It's a blood vessel that has been broken in some way, and now there's blood coming out.
Now, you're also familiar with another term, part of that term, known as a punctate contusion?
Yes, so punctate is essentially just a way to describe the size of a contusion. When I say punctate, I mean something that's very, very tiny, it almost just like a dot.
And with respect
Frontal and temporal cortices. So frontal, once again, is the front portion right here. Temporal is kind of right behind it in this area. And the cortex is the gray matter of the brain. So it's a thin strip that kind of just goes around the brain. So in traumatic injuries, you can see punctate contusions or even larger contusions in the cortex. It usually indicates that the brain has been pushed against something, which is now causing these little blood vessels to rupture, hence seeing the contusions because the blood is no longer contained in the blood vessels.
Now, doctor, with regard to the subarachnoid hemorrhage, is there anything that you're able to do as far as measuring that?
It's hard to measure because it's usually pretty vague. It's not usually something that is a well circumscribed, meaning I could say it starts here and ends here. A lot of times a subarachnoid hemorrhage, because it's sitting in this space that it's not supposed to be in, it can spread. So it may be thicker in one area, thinner in another. So you may have some that may appear just as a very faint hemorrhage, and then some that might be very thick, which you can physically measure. So give an area where it is and say it's here, it's there, because it's almost like measuring something that has blurred edges. You can't really get a completely accurate measurement.
And what, if anything, were you able to observe or measure with regard to the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the area of the left prefrontal lobe?
So it appeared thicker in that area, meaning that as opposed to it looking just like a faint red color that should not be that color, it was actually thick enough that it was obscuring the underlying brain parenchyma.
If I could turn your attention, doctor, just back for a moment to the punctate contusions that you were testifying about before. As far as your observations of those, was that one or more than one, or how many did you observe?
So there were multiple. There were multiple contusions to the point where it's not something that you can count. I mean, you could count it, but it would probably take a very long time. If it had been something like one or two, three, four, maybe a handful, it would probably be something I would say there are 3 here, 4 there, but there were so many that it didn't serve a purpose to count.
And the number of those, what if any significance did that have in regard to your analysis, your observations, or your opinion?
So given that there's multiple, it means that there's enough pressure in the brain that there were many surfaces that were pressing on the bony prominences of the skull, which was leading to a lot of blood vessels rupturing, causing these contusions.
Now, I think you've talked a little bit, but just in general terms, if you could describe for the jury, what is a hemorrhage?
So a hemorrhage is essentially blood that's coming out from a vessel. So it's like a bruise. Hemorrhage, bruise, contusion, they're fairly similar. Some people use them interchangeably, but it's essentially blood that's no longer contained in a blood vessel.
When something is termed medically, based on your training experience, as a diffuse hemorrhage, what does that mean?
So diffuse means it's over a very large area. It's not something that's just a tiny little area. You could say, okay, I'm looking at this person's, let's say, liver, and there's a 2 by 2 centimeter hemorrhage sitting right there in the right lobe of the liver. Diffuse would mean there's hemorrhage throughout nearly the entirety of the liver.
Now, with regard to, you made a note as far as there being a diffuse hemorrhage within the pons, P-O-N-S, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury sort of what that means and where is that located within the brain?
So the pons is part of the brainstem. So the brainstem starts right in the middle of the brain, and you have the midbrain, the pons, the medulla, and then it turns into the spinal cord. So the pons is kind of in the middle of the brainstem. And when you have hemorrhage in the pons, in this circumstance, it was because there was the herniation of those oci, which began moving closer and closer towards the pons, pressing on it, causing hemorrhage, because now the tissue is compressed, the blood is not going to be able to flow in and out freely, therefore hemorrhage.
Now, with regard to the totality of what you reviewed in this case in regard to Mr. O'Keefe, were you able to form any opinions to a reasonable degree of medical certainty in regard to the injuries that you observed to Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
I was able to determine that these are acute traumatic injuries. I know that based on what I observed and in combination with the autopsy findings, that this is due to some type of trauma.
If I could ask, as far as you have certain findings as far as an intraventricular hemorrhage and occipital horns of the lateral ventricles, correct?
Yes.
If you could please explain to the jury what exactly does that mean?
Yes. So the ventricles are almost like a tunnel system of the brain in which the cerebrospinal fluid flows through. So the cerebrospinal fluid serves as a fluid that nourishes the brain. It provides a flow of nutrients, oxygen, things like that. And it starts in the frontal portion of the brain, and then it goes backwards towards the occipital, which is the back. And it also flows downward through the brainstem and then into the spinal cord as well. So the occipital horns of the lateral ventricles are in the back of the head, and having hemorrhage in those areas, in any area of the ventricular system, is usually indicative of some type of trauma. So there should not be blood freely flowing within the ventricular system.
Now, Dr. Stonebridge, with regard to your findings, you mentioned that your findings were that the injuries were acute and that the injuries were the result of trauma, correct?
Yes.
What, if anything, can you say or can you opine as to the mechanism for those acute traumatic injuries?
It was something that required some type of force, given that there were skull fractures. I can't say what type of force or how much force, but it was definitely something that caused some type of force, which led to the skull fractures and then the subsequent brain findings.
And the brain findings in particular that you made, were those consistent with the fall?
They can be, yes.
Can they also be consistent with being struck by a vehicle and then going to the ground?
Yes, they can be.
Thank you, Doctor. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Cross-examination?
You're welcome.
Doctor, thank you very much. You are all set.
Thank you.
You might have to step down. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lally, your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the Commonwealth called Dr. Irene Scorti-Bello to the stand.
Okay,
And Your Honor, as she's coming in, may we approach briefly?
sure.
I'm trying to type quietly. I'm trying to put stuff in the chat. So she was saying that the pons, the occipital lobe, she's talking about all this stuff. Lateral ventricle. Is this the bad cop? Is he there to support his dead friend? Sorry, the lawn crew will be gone in a second. What's that? Brother what? Oh, that's the brother of the cop? The reason I put myself in the middle, I don't know if you're actually looking at the screen, is because when people go through the live feed, a lot of the times they have their phones on vertical and they pass
Madam
over.
Court Reporter, what was previously marked SS for identification is now the next exhibit in evidence. Thank you.
You can't get my volume anymore? It was off. Their volume was off.
All right, so are you looking for my instruction now, Mr. Lally?
Yes, please, Your Honor.
All right, so jurors, I gave you a similar instruction before about photographs. So the Commonwealth intends to introduce into evidence through the next witness certain photographs showing Mr. O'Keefe postmortem. You'll have those photographs with you in connection with this case. I understand that some of them will be shown up on the screen, and that's why I want to sort of give you a warning that will happen. When they come to you as exhibits, they'll be placed in an envelope. You can, look at them briefly.
Okay, so we're just going to take like a really quick break. I'll be back in 1 minute. Pete.
And I instruct you that your verdict must not in any way be influenced by the fact that these photographs
Thing, which is now causing
Good, please.
And ask you mindfully to step up. You could remain standing, please.
Oh, gosh. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
My name is Irini Scorribello. My last name is spelled Scordi-Bello.
And how are you employed, ma'am?
I am employed as a medical examiner.
And for whom are you employed?
I'm employed by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
And how long has it been that you've been medical examiner for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Massachusetts?
I have been with OCME in Massachusetts since December of 2016.
Now, ma'am, if I could take you back and just ask you a few questions regarding your educational background, work history a little bit prior to working at the OCME in Massachusetts. If I could start with your undergraduate work, as far as where did you go and what, if anything, did you receive a degree?
I completed a bachelor's degree in microbiology at the University of California.
And after receiving that degree, where did you go from there?
I went on to the University of Miami, where I completed my doctorate degree in immunology. And following that, I moved up to New York City, where I went to medical school and completed 4 years of medical school at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. And following medical school, I completed 3 years of pathology residency at the Mount Sinai Hospital.
And then following your residency at Mount Sinai, where did you go from there?
And from there, I went downtown in New York City and I completed a 1-year fellowship in forensic pathology at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for the City of New York.
And following that 1-year fellowship there, where did you go from there?
I worked in New York City until 2016 when I moved here to Massachusetts.
Now, are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
What are you board certified in?
I'm board certified in anatomic pathology and forensic pathology.
And if you could explain to the jury just briefly, what does it mean to be board certified and sort of what is entailed in that process?
Board certification is actually a voluntary process that a physician decides to go through. It involves completing an accredited program in the specialty of choice. In my case, it was pathology and forensic pathology, and then completing a number of requirements as well as taking and successfully passing exams, and then being able to say that you're board certified.
And is that certification at this time, is that up to date?
Yes.
Now, with regard to the time that you've been working as a forensic pathologist, are there any organizations that you belong to in relation to your work in that field?
Yes, I am a member of the National Association of Medical Examiners.
And that's an acronym as far as name.
Name.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, with respect to that time frame as well, what, if any, experience do you have in regard to teaching the areas related to your field?
I have always been interested in teaching. I started teaching as a pathology resident, teaching other residents and medical students. And during my time in New York City, I enjoyed teaching medical students and residents. We had a very active education program in New York City. So I've always been involved with teaching both pathology and forensic pathology.
Now, to those terms themselves, if I could ask you briefly just to describe to the jury as far as pathology in general sense, what is pathology?
Pathology is a specialty of medicine, and pathology looks at disease processes and as well as trauma and the effect they have on the human body.
And what is forensic pathology?
Forensic pathology looks at disease processes and injuries in the human body and tries to determine the cause of death in deceased individuals.
And as far as anatomic pathology, what exactly is that?
Anatomic pathology, as opposed to clinical pathology, is it has to do with any organ that is in the body versus clinical pathology that deals with fluids and blood analysis and things like that. So anatomic pathology, a lot of anatomic pathologists are surgical pathologists. That's another term that you will hear. These are pathologists in the hospital that look at tissues under the microscope, and they come to a diagnosis, whether something is benign or malignant. And forensic pathology takes anatomic pathology to another step, to another level, by looking at the whole body and trying to determine the cause of death instead of organ specific. Instead of just looking at one organ, forensic pathology looks at the whole body.
Now, you're also familiar through your work and training experience in regard to forensic pathology with a term called autopsy.
Yes.
And is that something that typically you would do in the case of sort of your investigation and your analysis when it came to a body or a patient that comes in?
Yes, an autopsy is a procedure that we do to determine the cause and manner of death.
And so, doctor, with respect to an autopsy, may be a term that's pretty well understood, but if you could explain in general terms as far as when a body or a patient comes in to the OCME, as far as what is an autopsy, what is it?
When a case, a death is first reported to the medical examiner's office, we make a determination as to whether that death falls under our jurisdiction. Cases that fall under the jurisdiction of the medical examiner include all violent deaths, all deaths that are due to not natural causes, all accidents, intoxications, deaths of babies and children, and deaths in individuals that were not under the care of a physician when the death occurred. So once a case is accepted and it falls under our jurisdiction, it is given a numerical number, and then the body is transported from either the location of the death or the hospital to our facility, our facilities. We have 3 facilities in the state of Massachusetts. Once the body comes to our facility, then there are a number of steps that are taken. The body is processed. What that means is that their pictures are taken, a weight is taken, a height is taken, everything is input into our computer system, and then a determination is made as to whether an autopsy is required in order for us to determine the cause and manner of death. If the answer is yes, then we proceed with the autopsy.
Now, as far as an autopsy is concerned, there are 2 sort of primary components of that as far as an external examination and an internal examination. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you describe to the jury, again, in general terms, sort of what the process is in reference to both external and internal?
Yes. So the autopsy or the post-mortem examination has 2 main parts. The first one is the external exam, and it is basically what it sounds like. We do a very thorough exam of the outside of the body. We document physical characteristics, eye color, hair color. We document any scars or tattoos that may be on the body. We take pictures, we make notes, we look for any signs of disease and any signs of injury. All that is, as I mentioned, documented. And once we're, during the external examination, sometimes we will take evidence. We will collect hair and nails from the body if we think that is necessary or warranted. And once the external examination is done, then we proceed to the internal examination. That involves making surgical type cuts on the body, what's known as the Y incision that goes from shoulder to shoulder and down the middle of the body, and the organs of the neck, the chest, the abdomen are examined thoroughly, again, looking for and documenting signs of disease or signs of injury. We do the same thing with the head. The head is open, the brain is removed, and we document any disease or injury.
Now, turning your attention to January 31st, 2022, did you have occasion to perform an autopsy in regard to a patient or a body of John O'Keefe?
I did.
And do you recall which of, you mentioned there were 3 different offices of the chief medical examiner within the state of Massachusetts, correct?
Yes, it was in the Cape Cod office.
Is that the office that you typically work out of?
No, that's not the office I typically work out of. My permanent position is in the Westfield office in Western Massachusetts. I was covering the office that day because we were short-staffed.
And in the reference to the autopsy that you performed with regard to Mr. O'Keefe, was that in conformity with what you were speaking about just before, generally as far as how you conduct autopsies?
Yes.
Now, during the course of the autopsy that you performed in reference to Mr. O'Keefe, during the course of the external examination, what, if anything, did you know in reference to that external examination of Mr. O'Keefe?
First, I noted that there was evidence of medical intervention. Mr. O'Keefe's body was transported to our facility from the hospital, and he had evidence of attempted resuscitation. After I documented that, I proceeded to document some injuries that I saw on Mr. O'Keefe's body.
And before we turn to that, if I could just ask you a couple more general questions. You've made some mention earlier in your testimony as far as the cause and manner of death in general. That's 2 things that you're trying to determine during any sort of forensic pathological examination, correct?
Yes.
And what I'm going to ask you first is just in reference to manner of death. Can you describe for the jury sort of what are the different types of manner in death, and how are they sort of classified from a perspective from your office?
Okay. Yes. So the manner of death are the circumstances that led to the cause of death. The cause of death being the disease or the injury that initiated the sequence that led to the fatal events. So the manner of death is circumstance dependent. There are 5 general manners of death, or 5 umbrellas. The first one is natural. When we determine a manner of death to be natural, it means that the death was caused exclusively by natural disease. That would be heart disease, liver disease, cancer, aging, Alzheimer's, dementia, etc. The second manner of death is accident. That means that the cause of death was due to an injury or due to an intoxication, either a physical injury or a chemical injury. But the circumstances show little or no evidence that intoxication or that injury was intentional. So most motor vehicle accidents, most drug overdoses, most elderly falls are classified as accidents. The fatal outcome was not intentional. Homicide is a manner of death when there is injury inflicted by another person, but there is evidence that there was intent to cause fear, harm, or death to the other individual. And suicide is due to either an injury or an intoxication, And again, the circumstances and the evidence suggest or point strongly to the fact that that was a self-inflicted, intentional act on behalf of the person with the intent to cause harm to themselves or cause death to themselves. So most hangings, intentional overdoses by prescription medications are classified as suicides. And then we have, and then we have one more manner that we call undetermined. Some jurisdictions, they call it could not be determined. That means that evidence pointing towards one set of circumstances or one manner is no more compelling than evidence pointing towards another manner of death. So if we don't have enough information to know whether something, or to be able to determine the circumstances, then we are left with an undetermined manner of death.
Now,
Excuse me.
am I correct in stating that the cause of death is something that's more like a medical determination? Is that correct?
Yes, the cause,
So watch the leading questions, Mr. Riley. It's sustained.
How would you characterize the determination that you make in regard to a cause of death?
the cause of death is based on my findings at the time of autopsy, along with any medical information that I may have on that deceased individual.
Now, as far as the manner of death, how are you making that determination?
The manner of death, as I mentioned, is circumstance dependent. I make that determination based on investigative information that is provided to me by law enforcement, by the people who did the investigation.
And what, if any, legal determination are you making as far as when you classify something as either of those 5 categories in a manner of death?
I am not making a legal determination. I'm making a medical determination.
And so as far as the medical determination is manner of death, specifically when I'm talking about something that could be ruled or listed as manner of death as accident, is that, what if anything, what if any determination are you making as far as that is concerned?
I'm making the determination that the information that I have either shows no evidence or very little evidence that the injury that led to the cause of death was intentional. So I don't have any information to suggest that that was an intentional act.
And am I correct in saying that routinely people charged with, say, motor vehicle homicides, it gets classified as a manner of death as accident, correct?
Sustained.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm showing you the documents, ask you to review it, look up when we finish.
Yes,
And do you recognize that document, Doctor?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
This is a copy of the death certificate for Mr. John O'Keefe.
That's signed by yourself, is that correct?
Correct.
And as far as the listing related to cause of death, what did you list as cause of death on Mr. O'Keefe with regard to his death certificate?
Cause of death was blunt impact injuries of head and hypothermia.
And with reference to manner of death, what, if anything, did you list on Mr. O'Keefe's death certificate in relation to manner of death?
I listed could not be determined.
And as far as that listing for could not be determined, if you could explain to the jury why it was that you have that listed as a manner of death with relation to Mr. O'Keefe.
Again, the cause of death is something that I can determine by the autopsy. I did the autopsy on Mr. O'Keefe and determined that he had injuries to his head as well as signs of hypothermia. So the combination of those two was the cause of death. The manner of death has to do with the circumstances under which Mr. O'Keefe sustained those injuries. And I did not have enough information to be able to determine whether those injuries were accidental or not. And so my manner of death was undetermined or could not be determined.
And just from the spectrum that you had just talked about, sort of the 5 different manners of death, fair to say that you did not determine that this was either suicides or natural causes, correct?
Correct.
Your determination of the manner of death being could not be determined, which of the two were you sort of in between?
The 2 manners of death that remain are accident and homicide.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Well, duh.
I want to seek to introduce in a minute the next exhibit.
No objection. Okay.
Ooh.
Now, Dr. Scordy-Bell, you had made reference
She just
as
looked
far as
right
the cause of death
at
being a blunt force injury.
KaReN
Is that
ReaD.
Correct.
At least one of the contributing causes. If you could explain to the jury sort
It
of what
bothered
you
her.
understand that to mean as far
Did
as
you
what
see
is
that?
a
I'm gonna
blunt,
show you, look.
blunt force
Disease or the injury
as far as that is concerned.
that the injury that led to the cause of death was intentional. So I don't have any information to suggest that that was an intentional act.
And am I correct in saying that routinely people charged with, say, motor vehicle homicides, it gets classified as a manner of death as accident, correct?
Objection. Sustained. Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Watch. Uh-oh. Hold on.
Comes in.
Yes, an autopsy is a procedure that we do to determine the
Maybe a term that's pretty well understood, but if you could explain in general terms as far as
when a case, a death is first reported to the medical examiner's office. Some jurisdictions, they call it could not be determined. The dorsal aspect of the right hand on this death was undetermined or could not be determined.
and just from the spectrum that you had just talked about, sort of the 5 different manners of death, fair to say that you did not determine that this was either suicides or natural causes, correct?
Correct.
And so as far as your determination of the manner of death being could not be determined, which of the 2 were you sort of in between?
The 2 manners of death that remain are accident and homicide.
See where she's looking right now? Okay.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Now watch.
I want to seek to introduce in a minute the next exhibit.
No objection. Okay.
I think she's looking right at KaReN ReaD there. Look. And then she looks away. She's like, oh, shit. Look how nervous she is now. She doesn't know where to look. Breathe, girl. She's telling herself, breathe, relax,
Now,
swallow.
Dr. Scordy-Bell, you had made reference as far as cause of death being a blunt force injury. Is that correct?
Correct.
At
It's
least
gotta
one
be
of the
weird.
contributing causes. If you could explain to the jury sort of what you understand that to mean as far as what is a blunt force injury.
Blunt force injury.
Sorry about the lawn crew. I guess I shouldn't do this on Thursdays, Thursday afternoon, whatever. I mean, at this point, I'm alone, but if you are watching the replay, I'm sorry. Can you still hear him? Yeah, I see him on the audio monitor. I mean, you realize I'm not really in a news studio, right? I'm not really in the courtroom. I guess they're being extremely thorough today. Anyway, I thought it was really interesting to watch her look at KaReN ReaD. You could just tell that's exactly what she was doing. Maybe KaReN ReaD was looking away for an instant, and so she was able to catch a glance without locking eyes. And then maybe KaReN looked back and caught her looking, and she was like, "Oh shit, look away." I mean, I can see. So one of the things that I love is photo analysis, and from the time I was like 10 years old, I loved learning about how you actually analyze photos and what to look for. And the same thing, of course, is true, but much more dynamic when it comes to video. Okay, you can't, because he's walking right by my window right now. They come by and trim, then they come by and with the blowers, then tomorrow they come by with the mowers, and then more blowers. Okay, so anyway, yeah, the whole body language thing is really fascinating to me. And what I really am very keenly interested and aware of is how everyone can confuse a neurodivergent with an antisocial. A really good antisocial is going to really be good at presentation and making sure they do all the things that innocent people do. Whereas someone who's neurodivergent wouldn't, and would probably express things very differently in different situations than neurotypicals would expect, and that antisocials know to mimic. And I just can't help but wonder how many neurodivergents have been locked up because the jury didn't believe them. You know? Oh my God. You wouldn't even believe the number of times I've been accused of lying about something or doing something I didn't do. And sometimes it did come out that I actually wasn't lying. I was telling the truth. And sometimes I have no idea. I just had to let it go and not be around those people. But it concerns me, and I think maybe that's part of the reason why I'm so interested in not only photo analysis, but the analysis of body language. And it's not so that I can learn how to mimic body language. It's because just like moments like that in the video where I am positive that she looked at KaReN ReaD, like everyone's trying not to. Everyone tries to divert their eyes away from her. But she's right there. And so probably KaReN ReaD was looking at the judge or looking away, and she was able to just catch a quick glimpse of her and then look away. And you could tell she was nervous. She kind of tried to calm herself down and tell herself to breathe. I find that stuff really interesting. Okay, here we go.
These are caused by.
I'll back it up just one more time.
And that to mean as far as contributing causes. If you could explain to the jury sort of what you understand that to mean as far as what is a blunt.
Caused by any blunt object. That is a very big category of objects. A microphone could be a blunt object. This bottle, if heavy enough, could be a blunt object. The ground can be a blunt object. So anything that doesn't have a sharp edge or a razor edge, not a knife, not a scalpel, is a blunt object. Blunt impact injuries are categorized into contusions, which are bruises, abrasions, which are scratches, fractures, which are a break in the bone, and lacerations, which are tears in the skin. So when we say blunt impact injuries, we could be referring to any of those or a combination of those four types.
Oops, sorry.
And all those are the result of impact of the body with a blunt object.
Now, we'll get more into specifics in a moment, just in general terms as far as from your external examination of Mr. O'Keefe's body, whereabouts sort of geographically on the body did you observe these blunt force injuries?
The majority of the blunt force injuries were to the face and the head, as well as to the upper extremities, the arms.
Now, starting with Mr. O'Keefe's head, what was it specifically, or where was it that you observed blunt force injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's head?
Okay. I observed a number of different injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's head, starting with his eyes. He had hemorrhage or bleeding on the upper eyelids of both eyes, as well as swelling of the eyes. He had a small laceration, a small tear in the skin on the right eyelid, again associated with the bleeding. He had some abrasions. Abrasions are superficial scratches on the skin on the left side of his nose, I believe. And when I looked at the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head, he had a laceration. It's a tear in the skin that was surrounded, or it was associated with an abrasion, a scrape.
Now, in terms of the extremities, and I'll start with upper extremities as far as his arms, what, if anything, did you observe in regard to blunt impact injuries to his arms?
He had, on the right upper extremity, he had a number of somewhat linear, somewhat patterned abrasions, scrapes.
That's not what he asked her about.
Varying sizes, ranging
question.
from small, 2 to 3 millimeters to, I believe,
That's not what he just asked her. He asked her about blunt injuries to the arm. I'm assuming the answer is none.
5 or 6 centimeters, both on the upper arm and part of his forearm. He had some contusions or some bruising on the dorsal aspect of the right hand that I measured and documented. He had he had a very small abrasion, I believe, on the lower extremities near the right knee, but I would have to look at my notes to be absolutely sure.
You can go ahead and look at your notes anytime you need to, doctor,
I
okay?
can go into my notes?
Yes.
Okay. So as far as his extremities, I noted a 3 centimeter superficial abrasion to his right medial upper arm. That would be the medial aspect, would be the inner aspect of the right arm. I noted the abrasions on his posterior right arm and forearm. Those ranged from 3 millimeters to up to 7 centimeters. I noted 2 red contusions on the dorsal aspect of the right hand. Again, that's the back of the hand. A faint abrasion, a faint scratch on the dorsal aspect of the left hand, and a small 0.5 centimeter abrasion on his right lateral knee, on the side of his knee, on the right side.
No, I think you've defined it fairly well so far, but I'm just going to ask you, just for delineation purposes, if you could explain to the jury sort of what is the difference between an abrasion versus a contusion versus a laceration?
Okay. An abrasion is a scrape. It's a scrape of the superficial layers of the skin.
Epidermis.
A contusion is a bruise. So if I hit myself hard enough on my nightstand, and I break blood vessels in under the skin, then I can end up with a bruise or a contusion. A laceration is a tear, not necessarily a cut. There's a distinction between a cut and a tear. A tear in the skin is due to a blunt object, maybe the corner of the nightstand that's sharp enough to tear my skin, but not so sharp as a blade that would actually cut the skin smoothly. So we differentiate between lacerations and cuts because cuts are due to sharp objects, lacerations are due to blunt objects. And fractures are basically a break in the bone, again, due to blunt trauma.
Are you familiar with what is termed as an incised wound?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Incised, I-N-C-I.
Incised, yes.
If you could explain the difference between sort of the mechanism and sort of what you observe between a laceration and an incised wound.
Yes, so an incised wound is what I previously called a cut. So the analogy I like to give is if you have a loaf of bread and you're trying to cut the bread. If you take a very good bread knife, sharp knife, you will be able to smoothly cut the bread. If you take a hammer, which is a blunt object, and you try to cut the bread, you're going to shred it up. So an incised wound is a smooth cut. Knives, razors will cause incised wounds on the skin. A blunt object will cause a laceration. It will break the skin, and the edges will not be uniform, and there might even be some bruising around it.
Now, with respect to the injuries that you talked about as far as the abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, how was that located in reference to sort of the circumference of the arm? And what I'm asking there is, was it on top, on the bottom, or everywhere?
I describe them as being on the posterior right arm and forearm. So when we examine a body, we examine the body in what's known as the anatomic position, which is the body on the table with the palms upwards. And so the posterior right arm and forearm would be what would be facing the table as the body is laying on the table. The backside of the arm and the forearm.
So the opposite of posterior would be what?
Would be anterior, and it would be this area right here that points up.
And as far
Or
as
forward.
the interior of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, what, if anything, did you observe as far as injuries there?
I noted in my diagram.
This is when the attorney says asked and answered. She's already answered these things. You don't have to keep answering the same questions over and over and over and over and over. Once it's been answered, it's asked and answered, and I've heard it a couple of times. I don't know why. Okay.
And my charts that they were mostly on the posterior right arm and
Whose testimony?
forearm.
Now, Dr. Scotti-Bell, if I could turn your attention to the internal examination as far as the injuries that you observed there, what, if anything, did you observe during the course of your internal examination of Mr. O'Keefe?
Okay, the internal examination, I will start with the head. Once The skull was open and the head was examined. I noted that there were skull fractures in Mr. O'Keefe's skull, both in the back and the front aspect of his skull. I noted that there was recent subdural hemorrhage. That is blood that is under the dura, and the dura is a very tough protective cover that sits over the brain. I noted that there was subarachnoid hemorrhage. That's hemorrhage that is directly on top of the brain under the leptomeninges, which is a very thin membrane that covers the brain. And at that point, I removed the brain, and I, instead of examining it right then and there, I saved it in a special solution, and I sent it to our office in Boston for a neuropathologist to fully examine.
And is it your understanding that a neuropathologist ultimately conducted a fuller examination of Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
Yes,
And who is that neuropathologist within your office?
Dr. Stonebridge.
Now, with reference to as in plural, correct?
Yes.
And,
Hold on a second. Okay, we're back. So, yeah, I totally could speed it up.
with reference to the fractures, what, if any, relationship did you know between the fractures that you observed and the laceration to the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head that you spoke about in your external examination?
So the laceration on the scalp that I observed was overlying the area of the skull that appeared to be fractured, or at least appeared that the fractures were originating from that point of impact and extending into the rest of the skull.
Now, what, if anything, as far as your observations of the skull and that point in the, I'm sorry, which part of the skull was the originating fracture?
This would be on the back of the skull, slightly right of midline.
Is that the medical term that that's referred to as?
I'm sorry?
Is there a medical term that that's referred to as far as the right rear sort of?
It's the right occipital.
And what, if anything, led you to that opinion that that was sort of the originating source of the multiple fractures in the skull that you observed?
Again, observing or looking at the skull fractures and their pattern, there appeared to be a central point with fractures radiating or originating from that central point and going into other parts of the skull.
Now, in reference to that laceration in the area of the originating fracture in the back of the skull, what, if anything, did you determine in regard to impact in regard to that area of the head?
Well, the laceration along with, so the tear in the skin along with the scrape, because they were adjacent, are both evidence of blunt impact. So I knew at that point that Mr. O'Keefe's head had come in contact with a blunt object.
Would that be sort of the point of impact between the blunt object and Mr. O'Keefe's head?
Right.
Now, with reference to the fractures that you observed, how extensive were the fractures that you observed, the multiple ones?
Well, there were multiple fractures. So by definition, multiple fractures in multiple chambers or parts of the skull. So I would say they were extensive.
Have a moment, Chairman.
Yes.
Now, when you're conducting this internal examination, is there sort of a division of the body that you're doing as far as what you're examining and in what order and sort of things that you're looking at from the internal examination?
Well, we examine everything, and usually we start in the external examination, we start from the head and work our way down. During the internal examination, we're doing two things at the same time sometimes, and so I start with the chest, move to the abdomen, and then the pelvis, while at the same time, we're working on the head.
All right, I'm going to pause you there for a minute. We're going to take a short recess, and we'll be back.
You can step down if you'd like.
Yeah.
But you can step down if you want to.
I'll see counsel at sidebar.
Taking a short recess. Does it come back on ever?
Observed that there was some.
Now, doctor, as far as the internal examination was concerned with regard to Mr. O'Keefe, starting with his stomach, what, if anything, did you observe of any significance in that area?
I observed that there were some small hemorrhages, small areas of bleeding in Mr. O'Keefe's stomach.
And are those described in medical literature as a specific type of spot?
They have a name. They're called Wisniewski spots. Wischnewski. And they have been associated with cases of hypothermia.
And how so? How have they been associated with cases of hypothermia?
They have been seen in cases of hypothermia. It's one of the findings that supports the diagnosis of hypothermia. They are not always there, and their presence doesn't definitively diagnose hypothermia, but they are one of the findings that, if present, suggest the diagnosis of hypothermia.
And based on your training and experience, based on other types of literature that you've reviewed in regard to hypothermia, what is, as far as these Wisniewski spots, and thank you very much for saying that until after you would say it, with regard to that, what, if anything, does it say as far as the causality of that or how that occurs or is related to hypothermia?
We don't really know the pathophysiology of these spots. There have been various hypotheses. People have suggested that they are a response to stress. Some people have suggested that hypothermia increases secretion of acid in the stomach, and that leads to these spots, but their exact pathophysiology is still under investigation.
Now, in addition to these areas of small hemorrhage in Mr. O'Keefe's stomach, what, if anything, did you observe in the pancreas?
In the pancreas, I, again, observed some more diffuse hemorrhage of the pancreas and the tissues around it.
And same question with regard to the spots and hemorrhages you observed in the stomach. What, if any, relationship do the hemorrhages or the bleeding in the pancreas have in relation to hypothermia?
Again, it's one of the findings that, if present, should alert the medical examiner to consider the possibility of hypothermia.
And as far as the observations that you made, as far as the hemorrhages in the stomach area of Mr. O'Keefe and the hemorrhages in the pancreatic area of Mr. O'Keefe, the sort of juxtaposition of those, what, if any, significance did that have in regard to your hypothermic diagnosis?
When the case was called into our office and when we accepted the case, it was reported to us that this was an individual that was found in the snow, covered with snow, and it appeared that he may have been there for a period of time. So one of the questions for me as a medical examiner is to determine whether there are any signs of hypothermia in addition to what I had already observed, which was the blunt impact injuries. And the combination of the gastric, the stomach, and the pancreatic hemorrhages strongly suggested, given the circumstances and how the body was found, that hypothermia did in fact play a role in his death.
Now, probably should have asked this first as a precursor. When you use the term hypothermia, what do you understand? What does hypothermia mean from a medical diagnostic?
right? Hypothermia is a term used to describe low body temperature, by definition, 35 degrees centigrade or below. And there are levels of hypothermia from mild hypothermia to severe hypothermia. It just basically means the body is losing heat faster than it can generate it.
And typically, what would be the sort of core body temperature that would determine someone is hypothermic versus not?
We're usually at 98 degrees or 37 degrees centigrade. So anything higher than that is considered a fever or hyperthermia. Anything lower than 35 degrees centigrade or 95 degrees Fahrenheit is considered hypothermia.
Now, if you could explain to the jury sort of a little bit about the type of diagnosis that is involved in hypothermia and sort of what other sort of types of information you would be looking at in order to make that diagnosis.
Hypothermia is a difficult diagnosis to make, and sometimes it's a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning that all other possible causes of death have been ruled out and you're left with hypothermia. So a body that is found in the snow or in a cold environment and has a core body temperature of 85 degrees and is unresponsive or asystolic, meaning that there is no heart activity, could be a hypothermic death or it could not be a hypothermic death. And it's up to us to determine by doing the autopsy what other factors are at play. So the example I like to give is a person with severe coronary artery disease goes out to shovel their driveway, suffers a heart attack, and drops to the ground and is dead within seconds. And no one discovers their body for a few hours during the storm. When they're found, they're asystolic, their core body temperature is 80 degrees, but the autopsy shows another reason for their death. It shows a massive heart attack, which is what killed them. They just happened to be outside after they died and they lost heat and their body temperature dropped. Doesn't mean they died from hypothermia. However, if you take a person, an elderly person, or any person, an intoxicated person, a person who is intoxicated with drugs, that goes out into bad weather, gets confused, loses their direction, isn't able to get to shelter, and they die, their body temperature starts to drop, they get more disoriented, they get more confused, their organ systems start to shut down, and eventually they die from hypothermia. So that person will also be found in the snow with a core body temperature of 80, 85 degrees. But when we do the autopsy, if we see those gastric hemorrhages, if we see that bleeding in the stomach, if we see the bleeding in the pancreas, if we look at their toxicology and we see that they were intoxicated with multiple substances, then we can determine or we can opine that the cause of death was at least partly due to the hypothermia, because they were still alive when they started losing heat, as opposed to someone who had the heart attack and was already dead when they started losing heat from the body.
Doctor, when coming to your opinion in relation to the cause of death of Mr. O'Keefe, in addition to your autopsy, your internal, your external examination, what, if any, other materials were you provided, and what, if any, other materials did you review in relation?
I was provided with a police report, an investigative report. I was provided with some of his prior medical records. I was provided with records from the hospital where he was first taken by emergency medical personnel. And during the course of the autopsy, of course, I didn't mention this, we also, during the autopsy, collect fluids from the body that are sent to the lab for toxicologic analysis.
I'm sorry ahead of time
And
if my fire alarm smoke detector thingies go off. I can't get my son's attention to come and fix his pizza situation. Nobody's on though with me right now, so we're good.
after a few weeks after the autopsy, we get a report from the toxicology lab. And in this case, I looked at the toxicology report. As I mentioned, all the information from the investigators, the autopsy findings, the neuropathology findings, and came to a conclusion as to the cause.
Now, as part of the documentation that you received from the investigators, did that include photographs of the scene as well?
Yes, it did, some photographs.
Turning back to the toxicological findings that you received, what, if any, indication did those findings have, or did they indicate in regard to blood alcohol concentration with regard to Mr. O'Keefe?
Mr. O'Keefe had alcohol in his system, and I do believe...
Oops. Sorry. It's just so weird to see someone take their glasses off in order to read.
I don't have the toxicology in front of me, but in his blood at the time of autopsy, the level was 0.21 grams per deciliter.
Now, contained within those toxicology findings, there's also something listed as a vitreous humor, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what that is, where that sample is taken from, and why?
Yeah, that sample, the vitreous humor, is taken from the back chamber of the eye. It's one of the routine samples that we take in addition to blood from the body and urine. And it's, again, used to look for the presence of different drugs. In cases of alcohol intoxication, sometimes we will get a value for the vitreous, and sometimes that value might not be exactly the same as the value that we get for the blood. It gives us an idea of where in the curve of alcohol metabolism, the individual is.
And so, based on sort of the disparity between the vitreous humor level and the, I'm sorry, I may not have asked, what was the level in the vitreous humor?
I believe it was higher. Sorry, I just have to find it. I think it was 0.26. I'm sorry, I can't find it in his notes. I don't know if you have the, yes.
Oh, yeah, copy of toxicology.
Yes, it was 0.28.
Now, doctor, with respect to the disparity between what was contained as the VAC and vitreous humor versus the other number from his blood, what, if anything, does that indicate to you as far as, or what, if anything, do you take from it?
That suggests that the level in Mr. O'Keefe's blood had been higher than 0.21, and that's reflected by the 0.28 that was in the vitreous. The vitreous metabolism of alcohol lags. It's a little slower, lags behind that of the blood and the circulation. The alcohol is metabolized in the liver, but the fact that it is higher in the vitreous suggests that the level in the blood was also higher at some point prior.
So at some points, whenever Mr. O'Keefe died, his level of alcohol was on the decrease. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Now, with respect to, you mentioned that you had reviewed the EMS reports from Mr. O'Keefe as well as his medical records from Good Samaritan. Is that correct?
Correct.
And if you could just briefly for the jury explain your understanding as far as some of the terms within those medical records. Are you familiar with your review of Mr. O'Keefe's medical records that he was labeled as being in cardiac arrest?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that is?
Yes, he was labeled as asystolic or in asystole, which is basically a flat line. So if you attach leads to the body, there is no electrical activity coming from the heart.
Now, with respect to Mr. O'Keefe, as far as certain vital signs were taken in the course of his treatment at the Good Samaritan, is that correct?
Yes.
Including a core temperature, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what that core temperature was?
Yes. It was noted as 80.1.
And that was a temperature reading that was taken at 7:19 a.m., is that correct?
It was taken, actually this temperature reading in the records that I'm looking at was taken at 6:57 a.m.
And with respect to that 80.1 degree temperature, that's in Fahrenheit, is that correct?
Yes.
And so what, if any, relationship does that have, or what, if any, relationship does that have to your hypothermic diagnosis?
Well, that is the temperature. At this point, Mr. O'Keefe is asystolic, meaning he has no cardiac activity. That is the temperature of his body at the time that he was taken to, that he was examined by EMS and taken to the hospital. So it is a very hypothermic temperature. It is well below the 95 degrees, which we consider hypothermia.
Now, I believe you alluded to it earlier in your testimony, but with respect to hypothermia, what are some of the manifestations of that type of onset as it progresses?
Well, the first evidence of hypothermia, which we have no problem in this room, is shivering. When someone starts to get cold, they start to shiver to conserve heat. But then as the body loses more and more heat, there are neurologic consequences. People can get confused. We see this in the elderly all the time. They can get disoriented. And eventually at very low temperatures, below 90 degrees, everything ceases to function. The heart stops.
And would physical weakness be, or lack of strength be one of those manifestations as well?
Yes.
And how many different sort of stages of hypothermia are there from the beginning of or onset of progression to the end?
There is mild hypothermia to extreme severe hypothermia.
Let me have a moment, John.
Yes.
course of his treatment at the Good Samaritan, is that correct?
Yes.
Including a core temperature, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what that core temperature was?
Yes. It was noted as 80.1.
And that was a temperature reading that was taken at 7:19 a.m., is that correct?
It was taken, actually, this temperature reading in the records that I'm looking at was taken at 6:57 a.m.
And with respect to that 80.1 degree temperature, that's in Fahrenheit, is that correct?
Yes.
And so what, if any, relationship does that have, or what, if any, relationship does that have to your hypothermic diagnosis?
Well, that is the temperature. At this point, Mr. O'Keefe is asystolic, meaning he has no cardiac activity. That is the temperature of his body at the time that he was taken to, that he was examined by EMS and taken to the hospital. So it is a very hypothermic temperature. It is well below the 95 degrees, which we consider hypothermia.
Now, I believe you alluded to it earlier in your testimony, but with respect to hypothermia, what are some of the manifestations of that type of onset as it progresses?
Well, the first evidence of hypothermia, which we have no problem in this room, is shivering. When someone starts to get cold, they start to shiver to conserve heat. But then as the body loses more and more heat, there are neurologic consequences. People can get confused. We see this in the elderly all the time. They can get disoriented. And eventually at very low temperatures, below 90 degrees, everything ceases to function. The heart stops.
And would physical weakness be, or lack of strength be one of those manifestations as well?
Yes.
And how many different sort of stages of hypothermia are there from the beginning of or onset of progression to the end?
There is mild hypothermia to extreme severe hypothermia.
If I may have a moment, John.
Yes.
Now, with regard, as far as the type of clothing that someone is wearing when they're outside in these types of conditions, what, if any, relationship would that have with regard to the quickness or the rapidity of the onset of hypothermia?
Clearly, the more layers someone has, the slower they will lose heat from their body. The fewer layers, the faster they can become hypothermic.
What, if any, information did you have as far as how Mr. O'Keefe was dressed when he was found in the snow on the morning of the 29th?
The information that I was given stated that he was wearing a pair of jeans and a long sleeve shirt.
Now, with respect to someone as far as that hypothermia onset and rapidity of it, what, if any, relationship with the condition of the clothing? What I'm asking there is more sort of dryness versus wet clothing. What, if any, relationship with that?
Well, again, wet clothing or wet conditions will speed up the rate at which the body loses heat.
Now, lastly, with regard to this area, Doctor, in regard to Mr. O'Keefe having sort of alcohol on board in the system, at the time the hypothermia onset, what, if any, relationship does that have in respect to the onset of hypothermia and the rapidity of that?
Alcohol intoxication, it has been shown to inhibit some of the mechanisms that the body uses to maintain heat. So it's definitely a factor that is a negative factor when it comes to hypothermia.
May I approach?
Yes.
Doctor.
I do. It is a photocopy of the exam notes that I took at the time of autopsy.
Does that also contain a body diagram with relation to your notes as far as where you observed injuries on Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'll move the seat to introduce Ms. Next.
Thank you.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, if we could publish that during this time.
Okay.
Doctor, there should be somewhere before you on the desk over there, laser pointer. Come in, if you could, Mark, that's been, if you could focus in towards the top and the head. Now, Dr. Squarty-Bell, what's up on the screen? Is that what you have before you as the next exhibit?
Yes.
And on this, as far as the examination that you conducted, that also included certain measurements as far as height, weight, things like that you did with regards to Mr. O'Keefe's body, correct?
Correct.
And if you could, what did you record as your measurements for both height and weight of Mr. O'Keefe?
He was weighed by our staff as 216 pounds and measuring 73 inches, which is 6 feet 1 inch.
Now, Doctor, if you could, using the laser pointer before you, direct the jury's attention to, starting with the front, with facial area, then to the back of the head, but just with reference to the head area, directing their attention to what, if anything, you observed in the area of the head of this room.
In terms of injuries, would you like me to point out the injuries? So as I mentioned, there were ecchymosis, that's another word for collection of blood under the upper eyelids. On Mr. Keefe, the ecchymosis on the right eyelid was also associated with a very small laceration. Then there was an abrasion on the left side of the nose. And then on the back of the head, there was a 3-centimeter laceration. So this is the right side. It would be towards, the back lower side on the right side of the head.
And that laceration on the lower side, or right side of the head, is that in the same area that you observed what you described as sort of the originating skull fracture?
Yes, when the scalp was reflected, there was bleeding under the scalp in that particular area. And then when the skull was opened, that's the area that appeared fractured and appeared to have other fractures originating or radiating from it.
It's going to be, would mind slowing down sort of middle of the torso. And Dr. Swaydell, if you could again use the laser pointer, just direct your attention to what, if any, injuries you noted in this sort of middle torso or upper extremity portion of this room.
So on the right upper extremity, and again, this is the back of the body. We have this collection of linear abrasions. I think the battery is dead. That measured up to 7 centimeters and extended from the upper arm down to the middle of the forearm.
If I could interrupt you for 1 second, may I?
Thanks. This would be the abrasions.
Ms. Tillman, if I could ask you to slow down for the lower extremities. Again, Dr. Swaydell, if you could, again, using laser pointer, direct your attention to what, if any, injuries you observed the lower extremities in regards to this room.
The lower extremities didn't have a lot of injuries. There was a small abrasion on his right knee area on the side. And if you don't mind pushing the diagram just a little bit more up to see the hands, there were some contusions or some bruises on the dorsal aspects of the right hand and some very faint bruise on the left.
Thank you. Ms. Tillman, you can take that down. Madam Pro Tem.
Yes.
I will just remind you that trained police dogs, and Gigi, you can confirm or deny this, a lot of the times the trained police dogs will do exactly that and attack your arm, right? Don't they? And even instinctively, somehow, I think dogs will attack the arm. I know when Joey was bit by a bull mastiff, it went for his arm, and he was bit like right there. He was bit like this, but the main puncture one was right there. So, just saying.
Doctor, if I could show you what's a two-page document, ask you to just review that.
Yes,
And do you recognize what that is?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
These are copies of diagrams that I used at the time of autopsy to document some of the injuries on the face and the skull.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'll seek to introduce in the minutes the next exhibit.
Any objections? Thank you.
And Your Honor, may I return that to the witness?
Yes.
With permission, if we could publish that for the jury.
Okay.
Ma'am, one moment, Your Honor.
Yep.
Okay, Dr. Swaydell, you recognize what's picking up on the screen is the next exhibit for you.
Yes.
And if you could, again, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, you observed or noted of significance in these particular diagrams.
So the upper eyelids, the areas of the upper eyelids on both sides had ecchymosis or blood. Under them, on the right side, there was a very small laceration or a small tear associated with that. Both eyes had some swelling to them. And then on the nose, there were two abrasions, two scrapes. One was small at 0.5 centimeters. The other one was 1 centimeter, and it was linear. And I noted them right there.
Come on, you guys scroll down a bit. Again, from the bottom right diagram.
So it seems like maybe, he blocked his face from the dog. He got hit in the back of the head with something, blocked his face from the dog. Right? Something went wrong here.
For you, Doctor, if you could, use the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if any, injuries of significance you noted in that portion of the diagram?
This is the area where I noted the laceration to the scalp. I noted something called tissue bridging, which is a morphologic feature of a laceration. Is what makes it different from an incised wound or from a cut, because again, the skin is crushed and now it's more irregular. The edges are more irregular. And then above that laceration, I noted that there was a scrape as well associated with it. So that was one injury.
Dr. If I could direct you to the next page of that exhibit before you. And Ms. Genevieve, if you could, here's sort of large on the top left side.
Yes.
Now, Doctor, before we get into a diagram that's up on the screen, if I could ask just a bit more, if you could expound upon when you use the term ecchymosis, what exactly does that mean in specific reference to the area of the eyes?
Ecchymoses are a word that we use to describe bruising. Orbital ecchymosis or periorbital ecchymosis or supraorbital ecchymosis just refer to the location of the bleeding in relation to the eye. When we see ecchymosis or bleeding around the eyes, one of the differential diagnoses or one of the etiologies is blunt trauma to the head, and specifically fractures to what is known as the base of the skull. And
So it seems like he was beaten and attacked by the dog. So he beat the crap out of him, and the dog attacked him.
what you're seeing here is the base of the skull.
Now, Doctor, if you could, using that diagram up on the screen, explain to the jury, let me ask first, were you able to formulate an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to sort of how the injuries within the skull and the brain interacted with each other, in particular interacted also with the ecchymosis that you described in the orbital region?
So the injuries inside the skull, this is the base of the skull. This is, think of it as the tray where the brain would be sitting on top. The brain has been removed, and now we're looking at the bones. Right here is where I noted the skull, one of the skull fractures to be originating or starting with fractures. These are linear fractures that are extending or radiating from this one point of impact. This is known as the posterior fossa of the base. These two chambers are known as the middle cranial fossa, and this area is known as the anterior cranial fossa. As you look at this, the eyes would be sitting back here. So the eyes are actually very intimately associated with the anterior cranial fossa, which is very thin, and the bones are quite thin and friable. So an impact to the back of the head was in this case, because we do have a laceration and we do have an abrasion. So we know that the head impacted something blunt with enough force to break the skull and enough force for those fractures to propagate or radiate into the middle cranial fossa and also the anterior cranial fossa, which is the front chambers of the base. When the anterior cranial fossa are fractured, as I mentioned, they are very thin bones. Blood can seep from this area into the soft tissues and manifest as hemorrhage or bleeding or a contusion or an ecchymosis around the eye when you look at the person's face, when you look at their face. So it is a well-known fact that fractures to the base of the skull can present with orbital ecchymosis, and that particular manifestation has a name. It's called raccoon eye because it resembles, I guess, what raccoon eyes look like. But emergency room physicians are always very alerted to any hemorrhage and any bleeding around the eyes, because it could signify or it could mean that there's a much bigger injury inside the skull, and that is not just some bleeding around the eyes, that it actually is associated with a skull fracture.
So the ecchymosis itself, as far as the sort of drainage or seepage of blood, that's coming into, that's what causes the eyes to sort of swell up, is that correct?
Correct.
And Doctor, if I could ask you with reference to, if you could illustrate with the laser pointer on the diagram up on the screen, as far as the subarachnoid hemorrhage, subdural hematoma, as far as the bleeding within the brain, what if any impact that has on the skull as far as the fractures are concerned, with building up the pressure itself?
The subarachnoid hemorrhage is a thin layer of hemorrhage on top of the brain, directly on top of the brain under the leptomeninges. meninges. The main effect, or I guess one of the effects that subarachnoid hemorrhage has, is that it is very irritating to the brain and can lead to seizures. Subdural hemorrhage is hemorrhage that is due to veins in the dura, that very tough protective cover on top of the brain, that are broken and leak blood into the space between the dura and the brain. That kind of injury, given enough time, you can have accumulation of the blood, and you can cause significant shift into the brain. That's not something that we had here. Here we had some subdural hemorrhage, but not enough that it was what we call space occupying. But it was present. So it was due to bridging veins in the dura being injured from the trauma, from the fractures. And in terms of the effect that all these injuries have, the subdural and the subarachnoid and the skull fractures, anytime the brain is injured, it responds by swelling. And the skull is a closed space.
without the ability to expand, unlike the skin, where you can have a bruise or a significant amount of blood accumulate under the skin. In the skull, once the brain starts to react to the injury and it starts to swell, there's nowhere to go except for down. And that's the foramen magnum. That is the area where the brainstem and the spinal cord will run. Spinal cord connects, obviously, the brain to the rest of the body. And this is one of the few spaces that the brain can try and squeeze into because it has nowhere else to go. So herniation, brain swelling and herniation are a general response that the brain has to any sort of trauma.
Ms. Cummins, thank you very much. You can, we can have the lights back on. May I approach Mr. Retreat?
Yes.
Now, doctor, with respect to the head injury, specifically the fracture, what, if any, opinion can you give or can you say in regard to the type of force or amount of force necessary to cause the fracture of the skull that you observed with regard to Mr. O'Keefe?
I can't really give you a number. I'm not a physicist. I can tell you that the skull is a pretty thick bone. It takes considerable amount of force to fracture the skull. So that was a pretty considerable impact.
Now, with respect to the injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's head and the onset of hypothermia, what, if any, opinion do you have with regard to the timing of those respective to each other?
Well, I do believe the injuries, blunt impact injuries, were sustained first. These are not injuries that are immediately lethal. This is not something that would cause death in seconds, and therefore, Mr. O'Keefe may have been incapacitated by the injuries or knocked out, if you will, and was not able to get himself into a warmer environment, and therefore hypothermia set in, given the environmental conditions and given the clothing on the body, or the lack of clothing, I should say, no big jacket or anything like that.
Now, when you say something as far as some type of injury being immediately lethal, can you give an example of that?
The one that forensic pathologists like to use is a gunshot wound to the head that goes from one side to the other, disrupting the neural systems of the brain and causing the person to immediately drop and die within seconds or milliseconds. This is not that kind of injury. This is an injury that took a little bit of time to develop, as is manifested by the fact that we have some bleeding, which means that the heart is still pumping and blood is still coming out of the vessels.
And so I guess to that point, as far as what was it from your examination and your findings and your review of sort of the overall materials that leads you to believe that the head injuries happened prior to hypothermia setting in?
Again, the findings of hypothermia, the blunt impact injuries, if someone is, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that someone becomes hypothermic and then falls as a result. But the hypothermia would continue along with the brain injuries that took some time to develop. So in my opinion, I believe the impact, the injury to the head came first. Mr. O'Keefe was most likely incapacitated or unable to move into a warmer environment, and then the hypothermia set in.
And if you can, what, if anything, can you say as to the sort of, in contrast to sort of the bullet to the head or the instantaneous death, what, if anything, can you say as to the time that this would take to manifest itself as far as the injury to the head and hypothermic state?
Again, I can't give you specifics. I would say this was definitely in a matter of minutes, many minutes, or hours.
Let me have a moment, John.
Yes.
Now, doctor, you had mentioned that at some point you had reviewed some photographs from the scene where Mr. O'Keefe's body was recovered. Is that correct?
Yes, I was shown some photographs.
And from the photographs that you were shown, what, if anything, of significance did you observe or lack thereof in the area where Mr. O'Keefe's body was recovered?
Well, based on those photographs, limited number of photographs that I saw and I was shown, there didn't appear to be a lot of disruption around the area where I was told that Mr. O'Keefe's body was found.
And that lack of sort of disruption in the snow around where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found, what, if any, significance would that have to you as far as from a diagnostic perspective?
Well, it suggests that he really didn't travel a very long distance once the injury was inflicted.
And as far as anything related to footprints, drag marks, anything like that, did you observe anything like that in that area?
On the pictures that I saw, no.
Now, from your extent of your examination of Mr. O'Keefe's body.
Okay, I'm just going to say this. I saw the video, and the video shows snow and tire tracks in a, separate area when they were looking at the video of her car, and it bumped his car, right? So there was snow on the ground, and you could see her tire tracks, right? Now, if there was snow on the ground around him when they took the pictures, and first of all, didn't they even say they disrupted the scene and left it alone and all this stuff? So the pictures that she got, if she didn't see any disruption, probably it's because the exposure was bumped up just enough to conceal any shadows in the snow. That would be very easy to do. That would be very, very easy to do.
Body. What, if anything, that you did you observe that would indicate any sort of altercation or a fight or anything like that Mr. O'Keefe was in?
I didn't see any signs, major signs of what I would call a significant altercation.
And with regard to that, as far as signs, what are some of the signs, and what would you be expecting to see, and what was lacking as far as your observations of Mr. O'Keefe?
I looked at Mr. O'Keefe's hands. As you saw in the diagrams, I did document that there were some contusions on the dorsal aspect, very vague and faint contusion on the left, and contusion on the right hand. That particular contusion has a central little pinpoint mark that may suggest that it was due to attempts to get IV access on his hand. That's a very common place, but I didn't see any bruising on Mr. O'Keefe's knuckles. His nails were intact. I didn't see any breaks on his nails, and I didn't see any fractures or feel any fractures on any of his hands.
Now, with respect to diagrams that were up on the screen before, as well as your observations from internal examination.
Okay, so maybe they tried to give him blood. Maybe the dog attacked him so ferociously and they tried to give him blood and it didn't work, and so they just took him back out there.
You observed some fractures to Mr. O'Keefe's ribs, is that correct?
Yes, he did have some fractures, I believe, to the 4th and 5th ribs near the sternum. It's a very common location for CPR-associated fractures.
And so, I believe you just alluded to it right there, but as far as any fractures,
Well, we know he
Mr.
got
O'Keefe's ribs, what, if
CPR.
any, do you have as to the origination or causality of those rib fractures?
As I mentioned, those are very consistent with the resuscitation. We see those quite often, given the history that I was provided that extensive resuscitation was attempted. I documented those as most likely due to resuscitation.
Now, doctor, with regard to the, just by way of contrast, you talked a bit about the significant impact or the thickness of the skull. How does that relate to the area of the ribs that you're talking about as far as can be fractured in resuscitative efforts?
Well, I don't understand the question.
Let me rephrase. What is the difference sort of between the thickness of the bone in the skull versus the thickness of the bone in the ribs?
The skull in general is a thicker bone. It requires more force.
Now, doctor, if I could, are you familiar with a medical term known as vasodilation?
Yes.
And can you explain what that term is and how it relates to Mr. O'Keefe's condition?
I can explain what the term is. Dilation means opening up. Vaso refers to blood vessels. So vasodilation is the opening up of blood vessels to bring more blood to the extremities or any part of the body.
And again, that's a bit of an unfair question to me as far as relations. But so how does that manifest itself as far as someone who's in colder conditions or has that sort of onset of hypothermia? What, if any, relation does the vasodilation have to that?
Well, you can see vasodilation. You can see vasoconstriction and vasodilation in hypothermia. Initially, the blood vessels will constrict in an attempt to reduce blood flow to the extremities so there's no heat loss. Anyone who has ReaDs knows what that feels like. Then ultimately, the blood vessels will dilate, bringing more blood to the extremities. Again, the normal regulatory mechanisms that the brain has to maintain our body temperature are disrupted when you get into those very low temperatures. And therefore, sometimes in hypothermia, you can see very, very red extremities due to vasodilation.
And with regard to the redness due to vasodilation, is there also a whiteness sort of discoloration to the extremities that can be observed in hypothermic patients as well?
That's been described as well, yes.
Now, with reference to when
Thank
you make
you.
your observations of Mr. O'Keefe, why is it that, well, let me ask you this, you didn't see any signs of vasodilation or white fingertips or anything like that, is that correct?
Correct. I rarely see signs of vasodilation, especially if someone has died in the hospital.
And can you explain to the jury sort of why that is?
So for two reasons. In this particular reason, Mr. O'Keefe was taken to the hospital and attempts were made at rewarming the body. So he was given warm intravenous fluids and attempts were made to bring the body temperature up with the hope that the heart would start working once that happened. Also, I did not physically see the body until Monday morning. And therefore, I can't really comment on vasodilation or any effects that hypothermia may or may not have had acutely on the body because I'm seeing the body hours after death. And already the body has been transferred from the scene to the hospital, stored at the hospital, and then transferred from the hospital to our facility. So there's just too much time between when the body was discovered to when I looked at the body to make any reasonable comments on whether there was vasodilation or not.
Hey, Coach Ron?
Yes.
Can't she look at photos? Didn't they take photos right then and there originally before they transported him? And if she couldn't tell that, how can she tell whether or not the snow around him was disturbed if it was the beginning of a blizzard, apparently? I forgot that it was sped up. It's still too slow.
Doctor, I'm showing you a series of 5 photographs. Ask you to review those.
Oh, well, that's what I'm
actually going to
saying. I
counsel
mean, the gist of it is that what I get is not only did they take no photos, but they collected forensics themselves, which means they were walking around his body in the crime scene and whatnot. And her saying that she didn't see any signs of anything is really misleading, if not just plain irrelevant. So that's, yeah, that's kind of interesting. They took no photos. No one took, oh my God. What do you think happened, Gigi? They must have muted it. They muted the sound. Why does everybody think she's guilty? Does he think she's guilty?
That we break for today. We'll start fresh with this tomorrow rather than showing these two folks now. So thank you. So we are going to end for today. We are on track. Maybe we are definitely on track for finishing this case next week, partly because of staying all day tomorrow and some of the work we did today, and on Tuesday we won't. So please follow the three instructions. Do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into the case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about the case, please disregard it and let us know. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Right, exactly. So they really can't have, they cannot have a trial because the evidence, it doesn't exist. Hold on. How can they have a trial with no evidence? Everything is beyond a reasonable doubt at this point. I mean, it's reasonably doubtful that they didn't do something to him, that's for sure. I know you're not feeling well, but if you feel like telling me what you think happened, well, that's pretty interesting. It happens all the time. The cover-ups and corruption happen all the time. Los Angeles in the 1980s and 90s, the Rampart division of the LAPD, that's why Bratton went out there from New York to like straighten him out. You know, it's bad. Whenever you have people in power, you know, and they'll protect each other because they don't want to go down. Not because they love you, because they fear what you know about them. You know? So what happened? Right? So what happened? Did he get attacked by their dog outside? That doesn't account for all the blood loss. Or why would they have their pool filled in? And maybe they had their pool filled in and their basement concrete replaced because they have a very high water table and it was just getting destroyed. And in order to preserve the foundation of their house, they had to take out the pool, fill it in to secure the foundation there because it was probably collapsing in, and the basement maybe had been flooded a bunch of times or something. So maybe they had to retrofit that. I mean, that's the only reason I could think of why they would do that. Now, if he lost all that blood in their basement, then they would need to get that fixed. But was he attacked by the dog in the house and then they finished him off, or did they set him up and beat the crap out of him and have the dog attack him and then take his body outside? And the phone was there the whole time? Did they plan that in advance? You know, throw his phone in the snow, go fuck him up, and then throw him back up on top of his phone? The simplest explanation is usually the right one. These days, that's a little harder to say because people are so corrupt. It's interesting. So she said, okay, so they gave him fluids intravenously through his wrist, which is interesting. I guess they do that, but you'd think, I guess they wouldn't pick a bigger vein. I mean, they pick whatever vein they can get. Did she hit him? How? Did she try to hit him? Did she hit him? Or did they do something to him? Did she hit him and then he was attacked by the dog? Oh, really? So you think that her attorneys know stuff? Interesting. I mean, they're cops. They would know better. There's a lag, so maybe I should, no, see, there's still a lag over here, so I can't really tell what you're responding to, because I think there's like maybe 15 seconds or so. Oops. But anyway, that was very interesting. When I was little and I used to read those. Okay, go feed yourself. Love, love. Bye bye. Bye bye. When I was little and I used to read Sherlock Holmes short stories, they're mysteries, and you have to try to figure out how they solved the case, and then in the back of the book it gives you the answer. And in one of them it was so good. It was like the woman says that when she stepped out of the shower, she saw him in the mirror. But most of the time, at least from what this situation was, if she just got out of the shower, the mirror would have been fogged up and she wouldn't have been able to see anybody in the mirror. So, there's also a show called Psyched. And it's about a guy who pretends to be psychic, but he's really just got these uncanny detective investigative abilities, and it's actually a really good show. It's called Psyched. I think it's on Amazon maybe. So, all right, I'm gonna jump off. I appreciate all my little friends who came on today, and I know you guys were only on for a little bit in the beginning, but I really appreciate you. It's different than my morning lives, which I interact a lot more, but this one I just like to watch the trial and see. I'm coming on to this one late, but whatever. Bye.